as we go through the weekends as well. So, we'll see what people continue to bring, but we'll definitely have a lot of considerations in the matchups themselves. So, Nagura, as we look at our bracket for the competition, what are our sort of upper brackets? What are we looking at?
More for that final. So a lot of the teams, of course, a team like Perplexed and Mandatory, they're aiming to stay in this upper bracket, while some of the other teams maybe don't necessarily expect to win against those favorite teams, but maybe they do. Like maybe they are surprising us because it's a global final and anything can happen. But yeah, we'll see who can stay in the upper final. It's going to be incredibly competitive.
Yeah, these teams, we've seen a lot of them even surprise us, and a bunch of others that have just made steady progress, so it'll be interesting. But, Dr. Atnos, with your degree in bracketology, what do you think the game's going to be down in the lower bracket?
Yeah, I think it's very important to remember that this is a double elimination bracket, so in a lot of ways, the most important series that you could run into in this weekend are going to be in that lower bracket, because those are the ones where you get eliminated if you lose. You can afford to lose while you're in the upper bracket. You can't in the lower bracket. So I think a lot of our teams, especially the ones that have been matched up early against, say, Mandatory or Perplexed, are going to be looking at that lower bracket and thinking about, okay, we're going to try our best against these powerhouses in the upper bracket in round one, but realistically, we know we have to prepare for the lower bracket because there's a decent chance we're going to get sent down there early, and we're going to try and make a run through the lower bracket because teams have done that before. I remember a few years ago we had a little bit of a lower bracket run when I believe it was Method NA eventually beat Method EU in Sydney. So a little blast from the past, but I think that happened through the lower bracket. So these things can and do happen, but teams have to be ready for it. So we're not going to see any lower brackets today. Today we're just going to start off on the upper bracket, but that scepter of the lower bracket is certainly, or specter rather, is certainly looming over all of these teams.
Yeah, knowing where those dungeons fall, what they might need to prepare for, what they think the anticipated outcome of these starting rounds will be, it's something that puts a lot of pressure on the teams, and it's definitely part of how they're building their strategies. So we'll definitely keep an eye on it as they kind of start to filter down a little bit. They won't be out, but they'll definitely have to contend with whatever is going to be thrown at them down there. So, we're getting close to our time to begin, but we have dungeons we need to go over, and things have changed a little bit this weekend. So they have kind of snuck up here, right? And we have some higher key levels. Zyra, would you take us through some of the changes in our dungeons this weekend?
Yeah, so like Dratnos and I mentioned earlier, quick bump up from 9 to 11. We're now at the 10 to 12 range. So every single dungeon is going to have both Fortified and Tyrannical on them. But when we get to that 12 level, our Xal'atath Bargain affixes have been replaced by Xal'atath's Guile, which increases the health and damage of every single dungeon that it's on by 10% more. So it's essentially like adding an extra key level on top of where they are right now. So those 12s, kind of need to think of those as actually 13s. They're a lot more difficult than the 10s and 11s, specifically for this style of competition. For the Xal'atath's Bargain affixes themselves, on the other hand, though, Voidbound has been the one affix that's really been causing the team's trouble. We've seen them a lot of time lost from that specific affix in Arakar's City of Echoes back in Group A. It's in City of Threads this week. We'll have to see how that actually factors into how the teams pull that dungeon. And of course, this is the first time we're seeing City of Threads on anything above a 9, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult than what we saw in the groups. Looking ahead to the actual dungeon setups we have for today, though, I think the dungeons really want to take a look at are those first dungeon in each series, the one that cannot be banned. We're starting off with Siege of Borealis, which is a dungeon that was highly banned in both Group A and Group B. We'll have to see how our teams in the first match will deal with that. And then I'm actually really interested in specifically these Stone Vaults for matches 2 and 3. That's a key that we know you can save a ton of time in the Skarmorak wing if you're able to actually kill the boss before it gets its first fortified shell off. If you're able to beat that, you give yourself like a 20-second advantage over the opposition, and beating that first shield on 11 is not something we saw at all during group stage, so if anyone's figured out a way to do that, they've got a pretty big leg up on the competition there.
Oh my gosh, it'd be really great to see that shield, that pre-shield burn, whether or not we think it's feasible. We've been chatting about it, but some of these teams have been pumping, especially with the boss DPS, so we might see it. I'm hoping. I'm holding out faith. But, we've had a lot of predictions, not just about the Skarmorak burn, but also about the teams themselves, and chat, you have been getting in on it as well. So we're going to take a look at where we last left off with our predictions board. Now, some things have changed, perhaps. They will change. But chat, you're ruling supreme.
Get that off the screen right now.
Leave it right there. Just leave it right there. It's ironic. What happened?
Listen, sometimes when you predict, it's more about predicting who you want to see win than who you actually think will win. I sucked.
No, it's fair. I think I do Hopium picks as well a lot. I mean, Makes was down there with you, though. I think a lot of us have been cheering for teams, hoping for those extra points, but there's also been some big upsets. And I mean, Dratnos, Nagura, you're hitting comfortably right here in the middle. You think you can creep up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. I think what we could do is we could just reset predictions for the finals. I think that would make more sense.
I like it.
Oh, deal.
Yeah, you know what? Let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's wipe the board
I'll
clean.
take it.
All right.
There it is. Scrub.
Oh, I like this. Not at the bottom.
Yeah, we're going to start fresh, but chat, you are still, and we need you to remain the destroyer of Tettles. So this is your charge. You've got to destroy Tettles at the very least. The rest of us, you can spare us your wrath, but we're going to set everything to 0. We're going to come in clean with some fresh predictions, and chat, you are going to be able to get your predictions in here and now as we look ahead to our first series, Perplexed versus Ducks Can Fly. So get some predictions in the chat and get your guesses in. I mean, let's touch on these teams a little bit, though, before we get into it here. Now, Perplexed. Who are they? Are they confused? Do they know what they're doing? No, we've talked about the fact that they have some of the longest history here in the MDI. But Nagura, do you want to tell us a little bit about some of that history?
Yeah, I mean, Perplex has been around forever. Honestly, I don't even know how long because... oh, there we go. Shells Angels versus Method A.
Sheesh.
This is a long time ago. Yeah, Divine Field, Ashine. Of course, they have been...
Yeah, that was the first time we had Hellflare.
Yes.
Not the second.
That was actually...
Hey, who's that guy on the left? I know that guy.
Oh, I know that guy.
Oh, wait,
That was Sierra, indeed. Talking about Sydney, by the way, on a lower bracket run. This was Method A winning that final there. But yeah, Perplexed, having been around for so long, they're the most veteran team. And I've talked about the fact that they sometimes perform incredibly well, of course, winning a lot of their competitions, also getting second as well, which obviously is still very good. But sometimes they join one of the competitions and they really underperform. And I think they talked about this, Perplexed. They said that sometimes they just don't know how to approach their practice. Sometimes they're overcooking certain strategies where they think, okay, we really have to execute this strategy to be able to beat the other teams. And then they spend too much time trying to figure it out. Well, maybe in the end, they shouldn't have done this, right? And they don't know how to fix this issue. So they're still kind of learning and evolving, which is cool to see considering that they have been around since the start, right? So absolutely crazy to see that all of these teams are still, learning every single time that they're competing.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of learning every time you're competing, I think Ducks Can Fly, who's going up against them, has literally been doing that. I mean, we've seen them just soar to ever greater heights, and this is the first time they've actually made it here into the global finals. So, Nagura, I know you have a connection to the team, but, to avoid any caster bias, I think we're going to let Dratnos talk a little bit here about Ducks Can Fly and sort of their journey upwards.
Yeah, Ducks Can Fly are a lot newer of a team than Perplexed, but they're not one of these teams where this is their first MDI anymore. This is a team that we have seen playing in last expansion. They started up in MDIs and TGPs, and we saw them, I would say, accelerate. But one thing that was really impressive to me is they looked so good in the group weekend this time. If they keep that trajectory going, they are going to be one of these teams that's going to be able to make that jump from, the kind of the mid-tier teams, the teams that are qualifying for these weekends but not making it out of them, to one of these teams that can actually challenge our top teams, take games off them, maybe even take series off them, maybe even challenge for that title of MDI Champion, as of course there are a lot of teams in the running for that this time around. I would say they definitely come into this series as solid underdogs against Perplexed, just based on the time trial times, the group weekend performance. I think Perplexed certainly are still a little favored in this series, but Ducks Can Fly absolutely are a team that can take games and maps off of anybody, and they are a team that I've been impressed with innovating in dungeons. The City of Threads that you're looking at right here, they had a fantastic poll that they were, if not the only, they were the first team to break it out, and then we saw a bunch of other people starting to do it, of just kind of running into the coagulation saying, you know what, we don't need to finish off all this trash, it's going to come later, we'll get it then.
Yeah, great to see them pioneering some of these mechanics, and awesome to see them have such good, solid runs, I think, throughout. There have been some stumbles here or there, but obviously their hard work is paying off, and although Perplexed, they are strong, they are fast, they were the Group A champions, right? I think Ducks Can Fly, they do have some good wins to ride on here as they've kind of picked up momentum in the competition. But we're going to take a look at our predictions now and see if they fell in line with some of our discussion. Chat, we'll look at yours in a sec. Oh. Okay, I believe in Ducks Can Fly.
You talked. You said so many nice things about Ducks Can Fly. What happened? What's going on, man?
My fingers must have slipped on the prediction entering
mistake.
thing. Yeah.
Oh,
my bad.
Sure, yeah. I mean, okay, so all of you think it's going to be 2-0. I gave them 1. They're doing good. They're flying so hard.
This is a dangerous 2-0 prediction for Perplexed, because like you were mentioning earlier, they've kind of had bad Worlds Finals runs for the past 2 years now. They've gone to the lower bracket. I think in the first round of the last 3 World Finals.
There was one where they went to the lower bracket and then they lost in the first round of the lower bracket, and they went out in 7th/8th in a global finals before. So yeah, I mean, this is a team that they have choked before in a global final situation. I hope for their sake that doesn't happen this time, because it is a team of such great players, and I feel like they've been hungry and so close to these wins so many times. So we're going to move in to our series here. The +12s with those Xalatath's Guile affix have been banned out by our 2 teams, which means the Grim Batol has survived. That one's a personal favorite for me. That is such a inherently volatile dungeon, even though it's a bit of a lower key level.
Yeah, Grim Batol, for one that has caused, I think, maybe, by my gut feeling, the most wipes that we've had in the competition.
Certainly if we include the Chinese weekend. That dungeon, basically every time it was run, now there it was the highest key, or one of the higher keys available, whereas here it's one of our lowest keys. But yeah, there are so many brutally hard pulls in that dungeon. But we're starting off with the Siege of Borealis, which is another dungeon. That dungeon got banned a awful lot of the time when it was available in Group B. That was a dungeon we saw teams avoiding. This time around, it's one of our mid-level keys. It's an 11 when we go from 10 to 12. I'm curious to see, though, what it's going to be like here, because I think the fact that it's been banned so much means that it's a dungeon that's been a little bit less shown what the best strats are in here. I think there's a decent chance that this one might have some of the most innovation compared to what we saw in the group weekends.
Yeah, Borealis is one that definitely, it seems like the team's deaths happen pretty frequently, but as they kind of get into it here and try to, I think, see if they've been able to refine some of those runs, refine some of what they've been working on, try to clean up some of those deaths, because as we've seen with that Peril affix this time around, those deaths can be a literal death sentence on your run if you just rack them up. So this is going to be a big one that's going to put both Perplexed and Ducks Can Fly to the test. Nagura, let's see how they handle it.
All right, well, straight away we do see Perplex actually running the Prot Paladin, interestingly enough, in that siege, while Ducks Can Fly is sticking to that Vengeance Demon Hunter on Goat Face. Both of the teams using that Shroud to get past that initial trash, which we've seen in the group stages as well. And now we're probably going to see a big trash gather up onto the first boss that is incredibly volatile, and so many things can go wrong on this one. So we'll see how the teams execute it.
Have to keep an eye on those iron hooks from the raiders here. If you get pulled in on top of the boss when the boss does its smash attack, you will not be immune to that damage. So they need to make sure they don't have any really bad overlaps and they kill off those iron Tide Raiders before they do that. And as we mention it, as Shine actually gets pulled by one of the Iron Hooks into one of the bombs and dies instantly. That's 1 death on the board for Perplexed, instantly onks. But the major problem here is that they lost that Ascendance on the Enhanced Shaman. Tons of their single target damage is gone here, but they've actually pulled this together quite a bit faster than we saw from Ducks Can Fly, and that might not end up being that big of a deal in the long run. We'll have to see, though, as Ducks Can Fly catching up heavily on the boss here, and probably even surpassing Perplexed on boss damage.
Yeah, this is crazy. Ducks Can Fly did focus, it looked like they were focusing a little bit more on AoE, making sure that the trash does go down, but as soon as the trash was down, they did manage to focus the boss a lot more, and now it looks like they're completely even. If not, Ducks Can Fly slightly ahead on top of the 15 seconds death penalty the Perplexed had because of the Shine death. Of course, the Shine also losing out on damage and cooldowns whenever that death happened means that Ducks Can Fly does have the opportunity to catch up here already so early in the dungeon, as we do unfortunately see an issue for Ducks Can Fly as well, as they do have to use their battle rest. So now we're even out on those death penalties again.
All right. Dead heat as we kill the first boss. Just 1 second between the teams. And we didn't really get a chance to talk too much about the difference in tanks, right? We mentioned they're playing a prop paladin, but one of the benefits of the prop paladin is just like the massive amount of damage it can output. You can see it bursts for a ton of AoE damage and just does consistent AoE damage, helping fill the gaps whenever your team doesn't have their 2-minute cooldowns up. Because as we've seen, this particular comp, this Enhance Rogue Frost TK comp, is very tied to their 2-minute cooldowns. Outside of their 2 minutes, they don't do great damage. They do okay damage. But outside of that, you're kind of doing cooldown pulls. This prop paladin can really bridge the gap, and you can see on this particular pull right here, that prop paladin topping by a ton as they move their way towards the spotters here. They're waiting for that first barrage of artillery, but now that it's down, they can go ahead and move on and finish off these powder shots.
Look at how volatile these pulls are, though. Swag already proccing that cheat death. Ducks Can Fly also having their cheat proc on that first pull of the dungeon as well. So none of those cheat deaths available for either of the teams for quite a while, as Perplexed is moving forward, though. Divine Field using Bubble as well on that first initial pull, where they used their Bloodlust on the first boss as well, making that initial gathering up a little bit safer. So I just do like that cooldown usage there, as we now see Ducks Can Fly falling a little bit behind in this area, partially because of that damage that the prop paladin can provide, as you mentioned.
And I think if I'm not mistaken here, we're going to see all of this trash pulled on top of the boss. Yes, here we go. 2 massive trash packs, 2 commanders pulled into Dread Captain Lockwood here. And now, one of the reasons this is so efficient as they pop their cooldowns here is they don't actually have to worry about the boss for too much. They're just going to push it to 67% here, get to that first intermission phase, and then they can turn around and use all of that damage to finish off this trash here. It's already all half dead by the time they get to the intermission here, though. And we're still in a little bit of a scary moment here, as 2 of those Ashvin commanders are going to be charging around, putting dots on players. They need to make sure they don't actually spread that debuff to too many players, but I think they've done a good job of it. They've killed off the first commander as well, so actually, no one's still alive here. They didn't focus it down, and those commanders are both still alive as they're about to transition to the second phase. Still 1 commander alive now as we go into phase 2, but pretty efficient, clean pull from Perplexed. Ducks Can Fly on the other side have gone for pretty much the exact same pull, but you can see the difference in damage is quite substantial, right? I mean, the damage is a lot more even for Perplexed as they make their way through the second transition. Ducks Can Fly haven't been in combat for nearly as long, but you can see the Vengeance Demon Hunters starting to fall behind the DPS a little more than the Prop Paladin is here.
Yeah, one more thing to mention is that Ducks Can Fly actually gathered slightly less trash on that very first pull of the dungeon, so they have to catch up percentage somewhere. It looks like it's not necessarily going to be here, I don't think, as the Perplexed did finish off all of the trash is up to almost 45% enemy forces. We'll see how much Ducks Can Fly can get up to once they have finished all of their trash, but looks like they're slightly behind. It's not too noticeable. They might be able to catch up that trash percentage without doing 1 additional pull in comparison to Perplexed. We're going to have to see, as Perplexed now, again, in that Dread Captain Lockwood phase, they should be able to finish off the boss here before that next intermission. As Ducks Can Fly drops incredibly low on some of that damage output there, but did manage to recover. And as soon as Lockwood is dead, we're going to see another insane pull very likely coming in by Perplexed. Good moment for the affix as well coming through for Perplexed at the very end of the boss fight. They're going to be able to carry through that buff onto the next pull.
And I like the efficiency of that boss as well for Perplexed. At the very end there, We saw them pull the remaining deckhands on top of the boss so they get a little bit of extra funnel damage, specifically for the rogue there. It's just a tiny little efficiency that probably gained them maybe 5 to 10 seconds of boss damage here, but gotta hold that thought as Perplex starts gathering up their next massive pull. The 2-minute cooldowns are available, so what does that mean? We pull literally every single mob that we can possibly tag. This is 2 Demolishers plus every single Bilge Rat in the entire room here. Got to keep an eye on those crushing slams from the Demolishers. That's unavoidable AoE damage. The only way you can avoid it is by line of sighting, but with the triple melee comp, there's no way they're going to be doing that. But with the 2-minute cooldowns, they just absolutely blast through everything. The Demolishers only got 1 slam off each.
Wow, that's actually absolutely insane. The amount of damage coming through here by Perplex is crazy. You can see all of the bananas on the floor as they're navigating through them. Not getting scanned. Savvy actually getting hit by the last banana. It's okay though, as they're moving on, gathering another big pull back to back, as they're gathering up another Demolisher and all of these casters here that they have to watch out for. No Tremor Totem available this time around, so they actually have to dodge out of that fear, as we do see them sometimes just ignore it and just stand in it. Dax Can Fly now also gathering a very similar pull to what Perplex has done, with 1 pull behind now because it took them a little bit longer, basically between that first boss and the second boss areas, where Dax Can Fly lost the most amount of time in comparison to Perplex.
And with the 2-minute cooldowns down, this is really where the Prop Paladin shines. Our damage meters didn't reset because they stayed in combat the entire time, but Divine Field very likely just hard carrying the damage on this group while his DPS players are resetting their cooldowns now. And those 2 minutes are still a decent bit away, but the travel time up to the next boss room should be enough for those to mostly come off of cooldown. Now the question is, are we going to pull everything on top of the boss once again? Is Perplexed crazy enough to do that? They don't have the cooldowns up just yet, so I don't think that'll be what they go for. It might just be all the trash without the boss, and then maybe pull into the boss once the cooldowns come up, or maybe once they've killed one of the commanders. There's 3 commanders in this pull, though. There's no way you can pull this on top of the boss. That's just too much unavoidable damage. Look at the damage going out on the group here.
Yeah, this is crazy. I don't think we've seen any team pull the boss on top of this insane trash roll here, just because of the sheer amount of damage these commanders are doing, as you're saying.
Ooh,
Look at the dot here on the shine, doing so much damage. On top of that, the boss, of course, also doing an insane amount of damage with that AoE coming in. So we'll see when they pull.
Cooldowns are up. There's the boss.
There's a lot of commanders still up. So this is still going to be an insane amount of damage onto Perplex here. They have to be very careful, making sure that they don't get to any of these overlaps, as we do see the crushing slime coming in by the boss. Definitely very well mitigated there. 1 more charge going to come through from this commander. You can see the dot on a shine. We do have the buff, though, from the affix to mitigate or to help with some of the damage here. And all of the trash is dead. Very
Look at the healing
nicely
meters
done by Perplex.
Look at the healing meters for Perplex. When the 2-minute cooldowns come up, the AG also comes up for the Shaman there, which also gives them a ton of group healing based off of the damage they do. And Shine was actually topping the healing meters there, doing almost 1 million HPS in the cooldowns with that healing up. So they're immortal to everything except for one-shots in that situation. So as long as one person doesn't get targeted by like 3 abilities at the same time, they should easily be able to deal with that pack. And that was just perfect execution there from Perplex, knowing cooldowns are up, we can burst through this quickly and get on top of the boss. This is extremely clean and definitely the fastest execution of the dungeon we've seen so far this entire season, I'd have to imagine. The cooldowns aren't going to be up again until probably halfway through the next boss, but look at the gap that Perplexed have opened up here. We were talking about what Perplexed we're going to see. Are we going to see the one that shows up in time trials? Are we going to see the one that shows up in group stages? Or are we going to see the one that's shown up in the global finals in the past couple of seasons? This is definitely the good side of Perplexed, and we love to see this from them.
Yeah, this is absolutely incredible. The fastest run we've seen in Siege of Morales in the group stage was actually by Mandatory. On a +10 though, it wasn't 11, and it was 11:50. So I took the closest key level and took the fastest run there to compare. 11:50 by Mandatory. We'll see if Perplex can actually beat that. So we'll see. But yeah, Dax Can Fly now also Nadal, and I'm like, credit where credit's due. Dax Can Fly actually performing really well. Like, they're not that far behind Perplexed, and they are the 3rd seed coming in to the season. And as we said there, maybe like, they're not the favorites to win against Perplexed, right? Perplexed, of course, that number 1 seed coming in, but they're holding up really well.
Shine got stuck on the tree branch there, almost went down to the wave barrage from Vic Goth there, but was barely able to leap out of it and avoid the one shot. He's a shaman, so he could just onk, but still it'd be 15 seconds on the board, which would be one of those tiny little things that could potentially let Ducks Can Fly back into the match. But I think the only way Ducks Can Fly can come back in this map is for Perplexed to have a full team wipe, what would that even take from them? It would be like a really bad affix spawn, plus a slim, plus a set of debuffs going out, and in the end that would only kill off 2 people, and they've got the 2 battle reses for that, and I think they are more than 30 seconds ahead, so Perplex just need to play it safe here. First platform down for them, able to burn through that first set of tentacles. First cannon shot goes off and deals with a third of Vitgoth's HP. Is that? Yeah, that's still in effect. The boss actually goes a little bit lower because they have the Vengeance Demon Hunter debuff on it, making it take more magic damage from the cannon. Yeah. It's kind of funny that that's still there. But onto the second platform here, and this is a no cooldown platform, so it's going to take a little longer than usual, but even without the cooldowns, they're just burning through these terrors here. These tentacles are going down so quickly.
Yeah, this is incredible by Perplex. We do see another set of debuffs coming through, as we do have some dwarf racial still left they can use to help out with those dispels in case they need to. Bloodlust still running for Perplex, as they did use it on the second platform, so they're gonna have to play that last one without Bloodlust available. But again, splitting up the damage, making sure a Shine can single target that gripping terror without having to switch targets, while the rest of the team is finishing off that demo. So Perplex doing an absolutely incredible job. And looking at the time, I mean, they're not going to be beating that +10 time that we're seeing for Mandatory, but that's 1 key level difference, right? And they're really close to it. Again, it was 1150 that was the fastest run in a +10 that we've seen from Mandatory. So they're super, super close to that, just a couple of seconds behind on 1 key level higher. That is absolutely incredible, as they are about to finish off that last boss once they shoot this cannon. And what a convincing run here by Perplex, winning that Siege of Borealis against Ducks Can Fly.
Fantastic performance from Perplexed, who will take the first map in this series. They are throwing down like they are ready to break their finals performance curse and show that they are in it for the long haul this time. But this was a phenomenal opening map from them. And, you know, as we were going through, Nagura, you were talking about this being the cleanest run of Borealis possibly. So what do you think worked really well for them in sort of their strategy and approach with this one?
I think I really like the Prot Paladin. Like, I honestly think that that Prot Paladin is a great idea to bring. As Syra mentioned multiple times throughout the run, whenever the 2-minute cooldowns were down, they had the Prot Paladin to carry some of these pulls a little bit. Also, having the defense, having the immunities to use when they gather up the pool. Some of them are actually really hard to gather, because, you know, you have mobs that don't like moving, you have casters, you have mobs that pull you around. So I do think that the Prot Paladin is definitely a really good pick here.
Prot Pally, strong pick. Well, you know, Dratnos has some more insights for us from that analyst perspective. So Dratnos, as you were going through, I mean, Prot Pally, what else did you see in this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Prot Pally was a big thing for sure. Looking at this graph of overall damage as well, you could see they were just kind of quicker throughout the dungeon, right? Like, there's not a huge amount of difference in strategic planning between Perplex and Ducks Can Fly here. You'll notice that a lot of the change happened around that 3-minute mark, right, where Ducks Can Fly sort of did a pull, whereas Perplex kept it going. But at the start of the dungeon, Perplex actually did have a death on a Shine on the first boss in CDs as well. When your die is Enhancement Shaman, you lose a lot of momentum in your rotation. A lot of stuff that, you know, a lot of good things are happening for you rotationally, and then once you die, they go away, and you need to kind of build them back up. So if that hadn't happened, I mean, that's 15 seconds of death timer, plus probably they would have killed that boss maybe 10 seconds faster. We would have been looking at a very similar time to the best Siege of Borealis times we saw in the group weekends, which were a key level lower. So, I mean, absolutely, this seems like a combination of just overall damage and route optimization that are Perplexed playing close to. I mean, I don't know how you go much faster than this in this dungeon. I think the Prot Paladin is absolutely a big part of the story as well. You're doing a lot of damage on that spec. It's facilitating pulls, and it also represents a lot of safety for the rest of your group, right? You have bop and or spell warding available for people against the most dangerous abilities, people targeted by stuff when you're trying to pull a lot of these enemies that you can just protect. And then you can just bubble taunt as well. You can hit bubble, taunt, and if it's a big pull, in these low key levels, when you hit Bubble Taunt, you are giving yourself 100% damage reduction for long enough that maybe just the rest of the pool can die before your bubble expires. It's unbelievably good. So I think that is definitely a big part of the story here. I was expecting to see Prot Pally as we scaled these key levels up. I was expecting it to be something that was, you know, a +12 thing, but I honestly kind of just think you could play it Looking at this dungeon, it seems like it would just be good everywhere. One cool thing they did as well is they had Divine shoot the cannon, and they just had Wolf Disco and Swag tanking the Demolishing Terror for a bit, right? You pop evasion, and then you have your DK come in, taunt, and hold for a little bit until your Paladin gets there, and that's a further optimization, just making sure that your lowest damage dealer, your tank, is the one that does the shooting and runs there, even though normally you'd think, oh, we need a tank there for this Demolisher Tentacle.
Yeah, I mean, incredible play from Perplexed. Phenomenal. Like, this was the exact kind of performance we'd want to see from them coming in, right? And all of those choices, Prop Pally coming in this soon, all of their strat just really solid. But, now we're looking ahead to Grim Batal. And Grim Batal is one that has caused some problems. Dux had a solid run through that as well, but Grim Batal is one that Dux has really struggled with on and off. So, I mean, Zyronic, looking ahead to Grim Batal here at this plus 10, what do you think the teams need to be focusing on as they go into this second map?
Honestly, just consistency, keeping up the low death runs. Neither of the teams had a 0 death run there. But Grim Batal is a dungeon we've seen. In Group A, it was banned out a ton. It was just really mean affixes, and also it's just a hard dungeon in general. If you look at live keys, Grim Batal is the lowest key level of any of the push keys out there, and that kind of does translate into MBI as well, as just being one of the harder keys in general, like just baseline difficulty. Something else I want to see is if there's any new tech stuff. That's kind of one of the things we haven't really talked too much about this week, and Dranos touched on it a little bit right before this match, but usually we see this big jump in tech and routing from group stages to global finals. Something that we saw from MOLY in Group B was a little bit of interesting routing regarding the Dragonflight bombing run in this dungeon, where they had their tank run ahead, grip a couple pulls together, and they probably fear sigil them together and then just use the Dragonflights to focus them down. I think you could probably pull more trash mobs together and be a little bit more efficient with that, and that way you don't have to do another trash pull going into the first boss. Make it a little easier to focus the boss down. We'll have to see, though. There's always also the potential for just bigger pulls with more practice.
Yeah, I mean, Grim Batal, one where we've seen some tech. We'll have to see what strategies they're going to bring to the table. Perplexed versus Dux Can Fly. This will be match point for Perplexed if they can take it. But Dux have to flap those wings. Nagura, take us into the action.
All right, well, look at that. We do have that dash Warlock again here by Perplexed as they immediately press the Bloodlust before the trash is even gathered. That means they're going to be very fast in this dungeon. So we'll see both of them gather up a huge amount of trash here as Perplexed, of course, having that Warlock completely pop off using all of those cooldowns.
This is crazy. Double Overseer, they have to worry about that Twilight Destroyer Dragon in the background, also casting the Umbral Winds, knocking everybody back, but it looks like they had themselves positioned well enough for them to not have to worry about that too much. And look at the group comp here. Just AoE blitzing, everything dead, no problem whatsoever. Now, the Warlock specifically obviously didn't top the damage there, but still, a massive amount of AoE damage. In addition to that, it also brings Healthstones and Curses, which are two things that are pretty useful just overall for living and staying alive. Just making sure you don't die in the key, which is kind of what we were talking about beforehand. This Grim Batal volatile key, even though it's the lowest key level of the weekend, it's something that we can easily see wipes go out in, and it'll be really useful later on to help with the damage coming out of the Warlocks in that second half of the dungeon. But let's take a look at the bombing run here. We do actually see Divine Field down there tanking mobs together like I was alluding to, and look at this bombing run. Look at all that trash that's going to go down in the focus fire from Perplexed here. We also see it happening for Dux Can Fly as well. Oh man, I love seeing this new tech shown off, man. That is just efficient trash pulling from the team there, and Divine Field can just top himself off with a feast there while he waits for his team to catch up.
Yeah, absolutely love that. Goatface doing the same thing on Dux Can Fly's side as they're about to gather up all of the rest of the trash that they didn't fully finish off with those dragons, and they're going to be gathering it onto the boss in just a moment, which can be super scary initially. General Umbra is actually engaged first by Perplex, and it looks like they're going to be waiting a little bit to finish off that Overseer before they're pulling the other trash bag that is still left into the boss. So always having mobs with the boss being able to use that funnel damage onto the boss and making the pull slightly less scary by pulling everything all at once. We do have the affix spawn for a pretty good timing as well for both teams, as they do get that 10 stack as well. And I did want to say that for the Grim Batal, so we do have the lowest key level here for this global final, but it was like a mid-key level for the group stage, and it was actually the same key level that we had for Group A, and Holy Moly was the fastest team for this dungeon, and they had a 13 minutes and 14 clear, so we will see if either of those teams manages to beat that time.
Similar strategies coming out from the teams also. We'll have to see if they do catch up with that time or even surpass it. I suspect they will based off the clip they're going at here, but I love just the efficiency of the cooldown usage. They pulled the boss with maybe 20 to 30 seconds left on their 2-minute cooldowns, just pulling in a couple of stragglers on top of the boss, and then when the 2-minute cooldowns were up, similar to what we saw in Siege of Borealis, pull the trash on top of the boss, blitz it down with your AoE cooldowns. Don't have to worry about it too much when you have that AG running on your Enhanced Shaman, topping everybody else off. But now the question for the teams is, what do you do next? There are no cooldowns available. The damage is not going to be that high. They do have the Warlock, so they have that Spymaster's Web Trinket that's going to help out and act as a pseudo cooldown, but they've probably only been in combat for about 2 minutes, so that's only going to be stacked till around 20 to 25 stacks at this point. You probably wouldn't pop it on a pack like this. I would suspect they'll save that for a bigger pull later on with a 40 stack, maybe synced up with an Infernal, just to help it get through it more quickly. Yeah, he would be doing a lot more damage if he popped it here. But still, this is a triple trash pull coming out from Perplexed with no cooldowns here, and they're okay. Just AoE through it, no problem whatsoever.
Yeah, it looked like they were going, like, I don't want to say slow, but they definitely were a little bit conservative on how they gathered up the pool, because that can be really dangerous, especially if they're lacking some of their offensive cooldowns. But now they did engage the boss with that Molten Giant. Dax Can Fly did a similar pull on their side as they're about to finish it off now, and we'll see if Dax Can Fly also gathers the Molten Giant onto the boss, because in the group stage, Dax Can Fly actually was known to not do that, and it looks like they're not doing that again. So Dax Can Fly not risking pulling that Molten Giant onto the boss. This is a very dangerous pull, and especially for the tank, this can be a lot of incoming damage, and we've seen some tanks struggle with it a lot. So Dax Can Fly still just not wanting to do that.
Looks like they were waiting for the 2-minute cooldowns here, as they are just now pulling the boss on top of the trash. So keeping it efficient there. Perplexed didn't... They just went straight forward. They weren't too worried about it. But still, the problem is, like you mentioned, the Molten Wake overlap with any AoE from the boss could easily just destroy any of the players, but able to keep the health bars topped there, and as long as they finish off that Molten Giant before the next one of the AoEs, they'll be okay. But look at how much that has cost them here. Perplexed instantly getting on the boss, instantly pulling it into trash, has gained them so much extra boss damage here, opening up a 35% gap on the boss. This is something that's going to be very tough for Dax Can Fly to come back from. But if there have been points in the dungeon where the danger has come, it has been after the second boss of the dungeon. These Twilight Warlocks have caused headaches for so many teams.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is a pull where most teams end up using some of their cooldowns, and then people just end up dying or having issues on that pull after this one. Especially during the gathering part, especially with the dragons not being able to line of sight the winds properly, getting so much AoE damage in. Looks like Perplex is doing pretty well for this pull here, and not using too many cooldowns actually. So we'll see if they might manage to survive those struggle points that we've seen happen for the teams in Group A and in Group B as well, as they did finish out. Unfortunately, they got a little bit of a bad... Ooh, that's a nice gateway. All right, so part of the reason why they have the Warlock could be even for a certain gateway pulls, right? This is actually speeding up that pull so much. I really, really like this gateway, and not having to go around, being able to skip some of this trash, and being able to get around this corner super quickly to get the Destroyer moving in and being able to get into this line of sight area. I really, really like this strat here. All right, so it does look like... so I did think that Sarah was talking, but
I was talking.
Like he was muted
But I was
everywhere.
muted.
Yeah, I thought that
Apologies.
maybe you were only muted in Unity, and the stream could actually hear you. But it looks like we were just muted for a little while. But doesn't matter. As Perplexed did finish off that first phase of the boss now, and they did manage to execute that pull so nicely. What a great performance again, Perplexed. As now they are in phase 2 of Valiona. The Lava Benders did die, and they also get a really good timing here for that affix as well, as they get that full buff coming into the second phase. And Dax Can Fly, they're also in phase 1, and they just gathered up the Lava Benders as well. And I mean, we are talking about Perplexed this whole time because they're performing so well, but I do want to again mention that Ducks Can Fly is performing incredibly well. Like, they're not quite as fast as Perplexed, but they're doing everything very similarly on their side, doing the same pulls, the same size of pulls, doing everything very similar. They're just not as as fast as Perplexed. They're just a couple of seconds behind. So I do want to say that Ducks Can Fly is also doing a super good job being consistent, not having any major mistakes or deaths here. And the 15 seconds death penalty in favor of Ducks Can Fly here, because they didn't have any deaths on their side, might actually come back and mean that they're winning if they can catch up sometime after this bus, because I do think they're a little bit further than 15 seconds behind still, but it could still be very close.
It could be close. I mean, it's the efficiencies that what we've seen from Perplexed in the past, and it's really coming to light here. The tiny little things they're doing just do a little bit better on every single pull. Things like the gateway, just teching in for this key. Things like pulling in trash in the final phase of Dread Captain Lockwood in the Siege of Borealis. You know, for tiny things for a little bit more boss damage, so they can gain a little bit of time here and there. That adds up over the course of the key, right? 10 seconds here, 10 seconds there. That's what opens up this 30 to 45 second gap that they've got on the third boss split here over Ducks Can Fly. And as long as Perplexed can keep it close, keep it clean in this last section of the dungeon, they should be okay. And look at what they've actually swapped their comp to for this particular dungeon. They've got a lot of Night Elves here. It helps a lot on these Corruptors here. If you're able to actually Shadow Meld these corrupt channels on the players when you don't have your personal cooldowns available, it helps your healer out a ton. You don't have to worry about taking too much damage there. There's Swag using his Night Elf there on one of those corrupt channels, so Sevi only has to worry about healing himself. Just really, really good, solid setup for this key here. No cooldowns available, no Bloodlust available, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see these Corruptors just go straight into the boss.
I think so as well. I do think we're going to be able to see that being pulled in just a moment, as soon as maybe those debuffs run out or are about to run out from those small ads just gathered up. There we go, Perplexed moving closer. Bloodlust coming up in 17 seconds as well, because Perplexed did use their Bloodlust almost immediately as soon as the key started. We're 10 minutes, 11 seconds into the dungeon right now. And if you remember, as I said earlier, the fastest run we've had so far in a plus 10 Grim Battle was from Holy Moly with a 13 minutes and 14 seconds. So we're already like 10 minutes 20 in, and we're already the last boss. We're up to 100% enemy forces by Perplexed. Bloodlust is running, all cooldowns coming up in just a moment, and they're going to be blasting through this boss in no time.
This boss is not long for this world, and like you mentioned at the start of the key, Bloodlusting pre-pull, just so they knew they could have it off cooldown at the start of the boss here. They are practicing this key. And look at what Warlock can do on single target. It's a solid spec, renowned for its AoE with its cooldowns, but the single target is very strong as well, keeping up and actually surpassing the Enhancement Shaman, which is by far one of the best single target specs in the game right now. Eridax will go down shortly, and it is going to be Perplexed taking a swift 2-0 to start the day and move on in the upper bracket, which is not something that we've said about them in the past couple of years when it comes to the global finals, but it's good to have the old Perplexed back, like we were talking about at the top of the day. One of the longest and most storied teams with some of the most veteran of players in the MDI, starting the weekend off right.
You know, whatever Perplexed history might have been with the finals, they are writing a new future, and it is incredible to see them come in here and just knock this out 2-0. Now, it's continuing on here for just a second, but that 11:25, so impressive, especially when we look back and compare that 13 minutes, 13:14 from Holy Moly that was previously the fastest. So congratulations, Perplexed, taking their first series here 2-0 with an impressive performance. I mean, Zyronic, this was Perplexed really playing at their best. And honestly, I have to say, Ducks Can Fly as well. I mean, Grim Battle, compared to some of their previous runs that we saw, was really solid for them here. But between the two, what do you think just gave Perplexed that edge, that advantage, that victory?
Well, not only did they have the better strat in general, but the execution was really what gave them the advantage there, right? Like, tiny things that we were talking about, like waiting to pull ads on top of the boss until later on to give a little bit of extra funnel damage on single target boss damage, not just killing off everything in one go. Things like that will gain you a little bit of damage over the course of the key and give you just those tiny little increments of gaps that they were opening up over Ducks Can Fly. Ducks Can Fly did look very good, though. They had very similar strats, if not exact same strats in certain aspects of the key. Just the execution was a little bit wanting, but keeping it close on just because of 0 deaths or 1 death in the key is actually going to give them a good chance of going far in the lower bracket. I think Ducks Can Fly can still easily secure themselves probably a top 4 if they keep playing this way. Perplexed was just way better today, and it's hard to beat a team that's playing that good.
Definitely. I mean, when the other team is just bringing out everything they've got and executing at full force, it's very difficult, especially from veterans like Perplexed. But Dratnos, from your perspective, what were you seeing this go around?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think Ducks Can Fly looked very good. I think they looked extremely clean, but Perplexed were just on another level here. The way that they optimize this as well, the amount of precision and planning that is required to do this pull here, right? Getting these 2 dragons, getting this grouped up, like you need to time this perfectly. Your tank actually needs to really plan out exactly every global to survive here as well. And you need to plan out every single one of those dragon shots perfectly from your bombing squad, of course. You only have 4 dragons, so every single piece of this route was planned down to like the millisecond. The Warlock facilitated a lot of really cool stuff as well. It works out so nicely, so naturally on a lot of these pulls. And that demonic gateway ability that we saw in the next part of this dungeon, right? You could just gate over. Something you gotta be a little bit careful of doing in your pugs, because you activate that dragon whenever you use the gateway, whenever you see a dragon corpse in this dungeon, if you touch it, you're gonna spawn one of those Twilight Drakes. Really gotta be careful about doing that. But it is something that, you know, if it's part of your plan, if your tank makes sure to go first, you can save a lot of time with this sort of strat. So that being said, we did still see a death for Perplexed. We've seen a death for them in both of these maps out of Perplexed. So I will say, you know, they are looking solid. They're looking really, really good. I do think that they don't look perfect, which is good news and bad news, because they've been so fast, even without perfection, that it makes you think if they can achieve that, then they're going to be just completely unstoppable. Because, again, they have these, like this run and the Siege were both absurdly fast runs with a death. So if you clean up that death, it is going to be all over for everybody else, I fear.
You know, I mean, I think Mandatory, some of our other top contenders, maybe even Holy Moly, you know, that's definitely a future that they don't want to have happen. Perfect Perplexed. Perplexed. Maybe rebranding. I don't know. We'd have to see. But it would be super impressive to witness it ourselves, and I think it would really give some huge challenge and competition to those other teams, right? But, I mean, Nagura, this was Perplexed playing really well. Ducks, obviously, they'll be going down to the lower bracket, but they were in good form too. So, I mean, for both of them kind of moving ahead, you think, as we take a look at the brackets here, right? How do you think this kind of looks for where they're headed and for our next competitors?
So, as I mentioned sometimes during the series, I do think that Ducks Can Fly did perform really well. Again, Perplexed just having these like really amazing runs and maybe even better than any of the other teams, right? Which is something we don't know yet. But I do think Ducks Can Fly has a really good chance to win in the lower bracket and to make it further in the lower bracket. So, especially because they played so consistently, right? Not having any of those major wipes, major deaths really speaks well for them, especially because we talked about this earlier where maybe some teams focus slightly more on the lower bracket map pools. Because, you know, maybe Ducks Can Fly didn't think, oh, we're going to beat Perplexed and it's going to stay in the upper bracket, right? But the fact that they still did so well against Perplexed with these maps that these dungeons that they were running definitely speaks well for them. And yeah, Perplexed, of course, in the upper bracket, they're going to have to play against Holy Moly or Worms. That's going to be a super close one either way. I'm really looking forward to Holy Moly against Worms because, of course, we don't really know how the Chinese teams are going to be performing against the Western teams. And Holy Moly, as I said, did surprise all of us, and they performed incredibly well in their group stage. So I do think this is also going to be a close one.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting one. I mean, the Chinese teams coming into the mix again after being away for a bit is something that I think a lot of the teams have been kind of going, well, this could either be a wild card or, you know, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. So Holy Moly, an actual wild card from our previous group weekends coming up against Worms, I think is something that's going to be a really exciting matchup. So everybody make sure you stick around to see it because this will be the first time that our Chinese teams will be clashing with our Western teams. And it's sure to be a very, very exciting time. We're taking a quick break, but we'll be back in just a few minutes. Welcome back, and soon welcome home, everybody. I mean, I'm so excited about housing in the game. I don't know. Makes, were you pumped? Were you expecting it? Were you surprised?
I was not expecting it. I think that's the one thing that I had written off for like the next 5 years or so, at least. So big surprise.
Man, I'm so glad we didn't have to wait 5 more years for it. I'm so happy it's coming this year. It's coming with the expansion, or coming with the next expansion. It's going to be really good, and I'm looking forward to it. But we've got a lot of stuff that we are also hyped about this weekend coming up on this next matchup, Holy Moly versus Worms. And, you know, chat, get your thoughts on housing in, but also take a little time to do that poll in there. Let us know who you think is going to take it between these two. But these are some really strong contenders here. I mean, Holy Moly just swept through the competition. And I mean, Zyra, with their performance in groups, what were you kind of thinking as we've seen them just crack records and just go whole ham, honestly?
I think they surprised a lot of people. When we were initially looking at the teams in Group B, I think a lot of people were looking at that and saying, well, who's really going to compete with Mandatory here? They're just going to sweep the competition. But day one of the competition, Holy Moly showed up and put together some ridiculous runs. They put together, at the time, the fastest ever run in Necrotic Wake that we'd seen with a 7:47. That was only just barely beaten up by Mandatory by 7 seconds, but they also had a faster run in Arakar than Mandatory. They had faster runs in every other dungeon, just across the board. Of course, Mandatory went back and beat a couple of them later on, but they looked really good, and it makes sense, right? They're MDI veterans for the most part.
Yeah, they are. I'm honestly so excited to see a team finally live up to their team name. Notably in the MDI, we've had some sketchy team names in the past, but Holy Moly is definitely giving me exactly that.
Living up to the hype. They branded appropriately as they came into it. I mean, yeah, they've been an incredibly strong team, and we've watched them, you know, have their highs. We've watched their records be usurped by the person that they broke it, you know, previously from with Mandatory. But they've really had a strong performance, which has been cool to see. And Worms, for those of you who were able to tune in to our Chinese broadcast, you might have gotten a little bit of a taste, or hopefully not a taste, because hopefully you're not eating worms, but, you know, you might have gotten a little bit of experience with them as a team. But Tettles, you got to watch their performance, and what were your thoughts on Worms?
Yeah, I think that Worms is an absolute top tier contender for this MDI. I kind of had some questions in regards to the composition that you're running. You can see them on the left side of your screen here. So they do play the very standard DK Rogue Enhancement Shaman composition, but a comp that they really like to stick to is this Aug Evoker Destro Warlock comp. And I had a chance to kind of ask them some questions. And one of the questions that I asked was, why are they playing this Destro Warlock Aug Evoker? Their answer ended up being because we tend to play our own classes, and they believe that the tolerance error in a rogue composition is actually too low. This means that they're more pushing towards a little bit more of comfort rather than top speed. And there's kind of a question as to how that's going to form and how that's going to play out. Whenever you were looking at time trial times for Worms, they were actually putting up the very similar time trial time to Holy Moly in the Necrotic Wake, meaning that these teams should be on a very similar tier. Now, how has the preparation been for Global Finals? That's something that's still left unanswered, but I actually think that this should be a very close series.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, lots of discussion, even looking at the time trials, into the group performance from the Chinese teams. But of course, they've had time now to take a look at what was on Group B weekend, and they've had time to even adjust some of their strats. So how these two are going to sort of match up will definitely be indicative of sort of how they might match up in the greater scheme of things, right? But we had our own predictions on this match, so we're going to go ahead and take a look and see how everybody's feeling between these two. I'm having deja vu right now. This is exactly like last time.
Rook, you're a believer, and I respect that.
I just want everybody to get at least one map, you know? I try. You know, why do you think this is definitively going to go towards Holy Moly, though?
Oh, I think Holy Moly has, for me, been the surprise team of this season. I think they showed that they can play with the very, very top that we have in this format, and I'm just not that convinced that Worms is up to that level. I think they're a good team. I think we're looking at middle of the pack towards the top if I had to place them somewhere, but I just think Holy Moly is really, really, really strong.
You know, They are. Tunnels, I saw you taking a breath. Any added thoughts?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Worms has top level speed, but I don't think they have top level consistency. Where for Holy Moly, I feel like Holy Moly, while like there's similar speed to Worms, at least in like a time trial setting, I have big concerns about Worms' just consistency on the whole. Whenever we saw Holy Moly in their region, in that Group B play, we didn't see them have a death until like the grand finals of that weekend, and so I think that that's something that is very difficult to overcome if you're a team like Worms.
Yeah, you have to remember, one of the big storylines throughout all of Group B was that Holy Moly had they had 0 deaths until the grand finals. They were playing lights out the entire weekend. They were only beaten just by slightly faster strats from Mandatory in the upper finals. So if they can keep up that style of play, they can definitely go very far this weekend.
Looking at the bans that are coming through here, though, I am a little bit surprised because this best of 3 has 2 +12s in here, and neither of them have been banned. And those +12s, they are a little bit on the longer end, and they're a little bit tougher to get through on these MDI-style pulls. So I'm really surprised that both of them opted for the City of Threads.
Yeah, I mean, interesting pick there with that one, especially when we've seen some strategies that I think have come out that have really expedited some of how the teams are tackling that one, Stone Vault, they couldn't ban that one out, but Dawnbreaker Arakara, between those 2 +12s, it's ironic. What do you think about those two? Is one better case, worst case scenario?
Okay, I'm so happy you threw to me for this question because, I predicted 2-0. Most of us predicted 2-0, but I really want to see this go to a game 3 because I want to see if they're crazy enough to go for the split strat on a 12 Arakara. But we're into the Stone Vault. Let's see what they can do.
Yeah, Tunnels, it's all you.
Yeah, and I mean, right off the bat, we're seeing the difference in composition. We see the Worms playing that Destro Warlock Augevoker DK composition, where we see Holy Moly playing that tried and true DK Enhancement Shaman Assassination Rogue. Wally on the side of Holy Moly is electing to play that Unholy specialization, and same with XMD on the side of Worms. The Unholy DK really has a lot of pop-off potential on some of these really large trash pulls. And I mean, look at the composition of Worms. I think that's something that Dryness and I talked about whenever we were looking at the Chinese region and talking about this comp in general, is the amount of AoE damage that this comp from Worms has allows them to just completely blow up trash packs much faster than other DPS compositions. Both that Destro Warlock and that Unholy DK over 10 million DPS, and I think that they should be getting Edna spawned at about the same time as Holy Moly, and both teams electing to not press their lust on this first pull.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me to see how the different classes are panning out here. Like you're saying, it's a little bit of a change. That Unholy DK, we have been seeing it in the group stages already, and for good reason. So like you just lined out, it's really good at the funnel damage. And Stone Vault in particular, there's a lot of targets, usually around one high HP target, which is where that Unholy really, really thrives. So we're going to be seeing them do really well. But coming back to what you were saying, now on the bosses where I fear a little bit, and I fear specifically for the +12s that are yet to come, because the comp that Worms are running is not that great at the single target, just kind of like shaving off HP of one target.
Yeah. Also notably, you can see on our Bloodlust tracker as well that Bloodlust has been engaged. That's not the real lust. They didn't just like randomly press it 40% of the way into Edna. That's actually a plot the future talent from the Augevoker. Every single time they press their Breath of Eons, they proc basically a Bloodlust on themselves. And so sometimes you'll see that firing off as if they actually have lust active. It's just the lust being active on the Augevoker.
Yeah, that's a good note here that's going to be relevant. Also, a quick note on that end that the teams are 1 second off, so that is something we'll have to keep in mind once we do come towards the end of that dungeon. They didn't start exactly at the same time.
Don't point that out. Now I can't unsee it.
Well, it's important because, it might come down to milliseconds, so we'll need to mention it. But for now, it seems like Holy Moly is taking a little bit of a bigger lead than milliseconds here with Edna going down.
Yeah, and I mean, Holy Moly are immediately running into that Master Machinist wing. Soda actually stays back a little bit to get the haste from the Ascendant Orbs, trying to delay that as long as possible to make sure that they actually have that haste for this pack. And they pull a massive pull into the Forge Loader here. A lot of these Forge hands these are like non-elite mobs, and they stack up increased damage taken on your tank. And so Teef on the side of Holy Moly is going to be on a little bit of a timer in terms of like how long he can actually live this pack. In addition to that, he might have to look to kite depending on how many of those smashes that they get on the tank. But it looks like the trash pack for Holy Moly is going to go down before Teef has to end up running away and kiting.
Yeah, there's a great tech that you can do when you do these big style polls where your tank needs to live and everything needs to be managed. You just do so much damage that they die before the tank actually gets annihilated. I saw your face, Pebbles. You should have known that that's where I was going.
I was like, what is she? Where she was going with this? Oh no,
what is the tech?
Forehead. Forehead, kill the mobs. Yeah, good comms. Holy Moly is grabbing double Forge Loader here into the corner. So one of the really nice things about Stone Vault just in general is that there is a very, very strong profession buff, and it's available to blacksmiths, and it's available to dwarves and dark iron dwarves. And what it gives you is it gives you 10% versatility, so 10% damage and 5% DR. That's why you're seeing most of these teams go into the Master Machinist wing first, is because they're able to sprint and grab that buff, and since it lasts 10 minutes, it's effectively going to last until the remainder of this dungeon.
Oh.
So Holy Moly do a very large trash pull with those Forge Loaders and grab that buff. And XMD on the side of Worms ends up going down. And this is actually tragic because they lost. Whenever you actually die with that buff, you end up losing that 10% versatility. So it is a 10% damage gain for the remainder of the dungeon that DK on the side of Worms is no longer going to have.
Well, the good thing is that versatility is not one of the high priority stats for Unholy DK, but it would have been nice to keep it. And that's kind of the big con of running a DK in dungeons where you need to walk a lot and you don't have a mount available because they're a little bit slower, so some of these casts can really get to them like you just saw for XMD there. But I will say on the overall picture of dungeon progression, both of these teams are kind of neck and neck as they are fighting both of the speakers right now. There's a lot of trash on the side of Worms still that they need to deal with, and you can see that some of these restoring casts are actually going out in the back there, so they will need to interrupt these and get it under control to not prolong this trash pull onto boss for too long.
Yeah, I mean, they were struggling to get the Menders actually killed off in time. And looking at Holy Moly, I think this is just like the difference in the composition. So Dratnos and I were talking about how we felt about the Warlock Aug-Evoker composition, and we kind of landed on this whenever we were casting over the China weekend, that we thought that this composition over-indexes on AoE and under-indexes on potential like funnel damage or priority damage whenever you have trash into bosses. And I think that that's proven really well whenever you're looking at how fast Holy Moly has killed off the Master Machinist boss encounter. Worms did a really big trash pull into the boss, and it looked great. They ended up bringing a lot more trash than Holy Moly into that boss, but and they got the trash killed off faster. However, the boss HP was just a lot higher, and now Holy Moly has taken a substantial lead in that wing. And so now Holy Moly are going to be making their way into Skarmorak. You see Lust is available here. Now it's only a question of how large is Holy Moly about to pull. A lot of the teams that we saw during Group A and Group B would actually take most of this Skarmorak wing area trash into the boss, but it's really dangerous. You have these despoilers, you have a lot of mobs that can cause problems as well. There's a lot of ground effects. There's a speaker if they end up silencing a healer or potentially the enhancement shaman. You can lose millions of DPS if you're not really, really careful with what's going on here. So we have to be able to get the trash killed off in a timely manner and make sure we get our kicks. So how big is Holy Moly going to go as they have actually engaged Skarmorak?
Oh, no.
And Soda goes down immediately. That is terrible. Enhancement shaman is probably the most streaky DPS in terms of making sure you have Tempest, making sure you have Maelstrom, making sure you have like pre-Tempests and getting your Lightning Wolves. It's like a specialization that feeds into itself a lot of resources. And so Soda dying, look at him. He's actually doing way less damage than Teef now. Is this going to become problematic later on into this pull? It's really difficult to tell at this point, but they're going to have an incredibly slow Skarmorak kill because of it.
So the good point is, while it is that shaman that did go down,
Soda
it goes
died
down
again.
here once more. They now have to use that battle rest. They did have an Ankh before, so one battle rest still available now to pick him up the second time he does go down. That was also their bloodlust that was sacrificed there, and everything has now been sent into boss. Like you're mentioning, the orbs being banished on the death there as well will mean that this phase will take them a little bit longer, but they do make it through 35% on Skarmorak. Now, Worms just pulled the boss. They're still pretty much ahead, but of course the death timer will now be against him with a couple of seconds as well. And I just think that was really, really unfortunate there for Holy Moly in that bloodlust to lose the shaman as they were racking up that pole.
Yeah, and something we had to commend Holy Moly for during their Group B weekend is the fact that they just had so few deaths. But 2 deaths to Soda on Skarmorak is incredibly concerning. Now, I think they're still in an advantageous position relative to where Worms are. I think that, oh my gosh, Urks end up getting hit by the circle from the ground effect from Skarmorak and then going down to the piercing whale cast that goes off due to a missed kick. That is even worse than what happened to Soda there. You end up losing that Spymaster's web being stacked up, and he ended up losing his bloodlust. That is a huge death on the side of Worms makes.
It is, and exactly for the reason that you're mentioning. Going into this dungeon, we kind of had the idea of, with that Archevoker, with that Spy Masters, maybe there's a world where they're just way faster on Skarmorak, but now all of that has been lost. They don't have the Battle Rest available because they needed to use it on XMD, so they're now basically fighting this boss as form and stack with all of this trash still in the boss fight and the Warlock nowhere to be found. This is where that Bloodlust goes in, and you're just in despair right now if you're a Worms fan.
I mean, look at Holy Moly here. Holy Moly are already onto this Rock Smasher. In Worms, they needed to accelerate in the Skarmorak wing, and they're actually going to have an even worse Skarmorak split than Holy Moly, even though Soda ended up going down twice on that Skarmorak boss fight. And they don't even have a res for Urks still. Like, this is by far the worst case scenario. With this composition as well, since you're playing that Archevoker, whenever you lose a DPS, you're actually losing a lot more value than a composition like Holy Moly's, just because that Archevoker, most of its damage actually comes from buffing up the other DPS. And I think that Holy Moly here, once they pull Eirik, Void Speaker Eirik, this is the last difficult part of the dungeon. The power infusion has been pressed on Soda from Igloo. They need to just make sure that they get these Rock Smashers killed off. They need to make sure that they don't have any deaths. They do have 1 battle res available for them as well, in case something does go a little bit awry. But assuming that they don't have a full wipe here, I think that they're going to be able to take down the Stone Vault map over Worms.
Oh, a nice little grip there coming out of Igloo to make sure that Soda actually can get the portal there and doesn't lose too much uptime, because as we all know, that Ghost Wolf might be faster than walking but is not the fastest, and now those Rock Smashers are slowly but surely dying. One more time, double damage coming in. Here is that extra shield coming through from that Disc Freeze, making sure nobody will take too much damage from it, and they should now be on the safe end of this pull. It's only dealing with the debuff that they have to do right now and then get through the boss fight. 39% to go, while Worms haven't even pulled Eirik just yet.
Yeah, I mean, look at Holy Moly. Wally is just holding this debuff on that DK. He might actually end up going down here if he's not too careful. He actually gets pain supped, and then press Death's Advance, mounting up on that Rider of the Apocalypse on Holy DK, and jumps into the portal. The greed is real, I think, with the DKs.
That's how Mellies play. Come on.
I don't have mobility. Dude, they're Rider of the Apocalypse. They can actually walk. You can walk away from the boss, man. Like, please. But
why should you if you can live?
That's true. Nothing to be worried about if you can live. And Holy Moly, with 2 deaths in this dungeon, are going to be able to take down the first map in the Stone Vault. And that looked phenomenal by them.
Really, really well done. Of course, even with those unfortunate deaths, with Holy Moly, they still pulled it off, keeping that lead and powering through the Stone Vault here. I mean, Holy Moly, they had a really good deathless run for a while, but they still are fast, even when they make those mistakes. Now, Worms are going to have some work to do if they want to catch up, but looking at the comps on either side here, I mean, Megs, what did you kind of feel about what both of these teams brought to the table?
So we were mentioning it going into this dungeon that they do have the capabilities to do really big style pulls, but I think specifically in a dungeon like Stone Vault, where you have these single target bosses that you need to get through, like Edna, for example, or even Skarmorak to an extent, that's kind of where those classes will struggle a little bit more. And then, of course, the deaths for Worms were really what did them in for, and that's unfortunately not a class choice, although with, like Tuttles mentioned, that Warlock going down hurts even more if one of your other 2 DPSs is an augmentation evoker, since that damage is then also lacking. But in the end, I believe this was mostly a playing issue rather than a team issue.
We'll see if Zyronic feels the same. Zyronic, take us into your replays.
She's right. I mean, let's be honest.
Thank you.
It wasn't necessarily like a comp. It was just play. The play from Holy Moly was definitely just they picked up where they left off back in Group B, right? Obviously, they're not going to go on a deathless streak. We had those 2 deaths on Skarmorak, but it was still overall a good run. And I liked some of the ideas that we saw from Worms as well. Going for this pull, leveraging your double 40 stack is a good idea in concept. But on the gather here, they had their DK go down to a concussive smash from a couple of the engine speakers, and then when they had the Soulstone, that actually gave the casters trailing behind the chance to sit and cast for a little while instead of trailing into the boss. So you can see the Warlock's already starting to go for the AoE engine, but there's still trash funneling in. That means they didn't get those MLAs from the Cataclysm. It means they weren't part of the initial burst damage, so it's going to take them a lot longer to burst through this trash. Also, the Unholy DK lost a bunch of setup dying on the gather as well. So that pull probably goes about a minute faster for them, all things said and done, if they don't have any deaths there. And they actually get the gather properly. Unfortunately, it just wasn't meant to be, but wasn't all perfection from Holy Moly here. Soda did die on the pull to a melee from the boss here. He's not going to be happy about that one. Did get all of his damage out on the boss from Ascendance here, mostly doing single target here, letting his Unholy DK go to work on the trash here, and also letting Wixie get a bunch of funnel as well. But then Soda also dies to the AoE here. I think he was one of the major carriers for the orb debuff here, so when they do get this fortified shell, ended up taking them a long time to chew through. Luckily, they were able to keep it to those 2 deaths and keep it clean from there on out, and this trash pull onto the last boss, keeping it clean here. They did have the battle res in the back pocket just in case anything did go wrong, but, you know, aside from those couple of hiccups, Holy Moly, they looked good. They looked like the team we saw in Group B, and again, I think this is a team that can easily play for a top 3 spot this weekend if they keep up this style of play.
Holy Moly are strong contenders for sure, but you know, we're coming up on something that's a little bit of their kryptonite. Holy Moly has struggled in the city of Dawnbreaker, and this will be the first plus 12 that we have of the competition, and that plus 12 Dawnbreaker here. I mean, Tettles, as we step into the plus 12s, how do you think this is going to amp things up for these 2 teams?
I think that Worms honestly can't afford to play the Warlock Augevoker in Dawnbreaker. I think that just the texture of Dawnbreaker is a lot of small mobs on top of a mini-boss, and that is a very, very common damage profile for this dungeon. I think you have to have the Assassination Rogue and the Enhancement Shaman just to be able to be successful here, so I think they're going to need to be able to flex into that composition. As for just, you know, like you're saying, the city of Dawnbreaker, I think that there are a couple of crucial points to this dungeon that matter. The 2 courtyard pulls, that are, one of them is into the boss and one of them is just like a bunch of mobs and shadow mages, especially whenever you're pressing that with your lust. Those kind of setups and those kind of dungeons and moments are the most important points, and points at which we've seen players die a lot. And so are you able to keep all of your people alive? Are you going to be able to take all this trash in the boss? I think we saw one of the fastest Dawnbreakers put up by Holy Moly in Group B. Are they going to be able to continue that kind of momentum?
I actually have a question, because you're mentioning that Bloodlust there, Tattles. I know that's something we've been seeing in the groups, but now since this is a plus 12, is there maybe a chance where we're not going to see them use Lust there? Because I still think it's a very valuable Lust, but it might be that the dungeon will open itself up for
That's a good question.
Potential good Lusts.
So, I mean, I think that, like, you would still be lusting. So the dungeon was still a bit over 10 minutes during Group A and Group B, even though it was sub 12. Now it'll probably end up being like a 13 or 14 minute dungeon, if I had to guess. And so then I think that the lusts would still be like the first pull of the dungeon, or potentially even the second pull of the dungeon, and then on Roshanon again, which you already would have seen in Group A or Group B if it was a better lust. And so I kind of am expecting it to still be around that 7 to 8 minute mark, and you just like one lust the dungeon, do something that's like a bigger trash pull, and use the Bloodlust as an enabler as opposed to using it for maximum uses. Because the kind of logic between whenever you're deciding what you're going to lust is, does the lust enable a pull? If the answer is yes, and you can actually skip a pull with that Bloodlust, you always use it on that. Otherwise, you go for maximum uses.
So I think for me, the issue is that a lot of the pulls, like you're saying, like an enabler, a lot of the pulls are not enabled by lust, but rather than having more stops and interrupts, especially in Dawnbreaker, where there's so many casters. So I'm not really sure if there is a pull that I can currently think of that lust is going to help with. I'm curious. I'm curious what the teams say.
I mean, they kept taking like double Shadow Mage into Anubikaj, the second boss here, and I think that is like, if you end up having the Dark Caster's channel for too long, you end up having those Shadow Mages like free casting on you, that can actually cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, I mean, this pacing, 1 Lust versus 2 is something we've kind of talked about, right? That advantage of being able to hold on to 1 so that you can time it exactly where you think you have the most impact, or trying to use 2 so that you have perhaps over the course a higher threshold of damage that you've been able to put out sort of spread throughout the dungeon. But as we get to these higher levels, it's really interesting to hear you both talk about it, you know, like what those sort of advantages might be or disadvantages. And it's ironic, you know, we'll be heading into the dungeon here in a second, but did you have any specific thoughts either about the Lust or about other adjustments that'll be coming into strats for plus 12?
I'm very interested to see just how difficult this is on a 12, because you have to remember, no bargains anymore, no beneficial buffs in the dungeon for the team. The dungeon just essentially gets 1 level harder. So this is a 12 with a +1 affix on it, essentially, when you factor in Guile. These mobs are going to hurt, and any mistakes you make are going to be amplified by just that much more. And specifically, like you guys keep mentioning, those courtyard pulls, anything goes wrong there, extra casts go off, you bait an orb incorrectly, it's going to punish you if you make those mistakes. This key is going to just wipe the group instantly. So really, this key, I think, is going to come down not necessarily to who has the best execution, but who just doesn't die. If one of these teams has 0 deaths, they're going to win. Because almost certainly we're going to see several deaths in this dungeon, if not a ton.
Sure, yeah, just don't die. That's the goal for both of our teams here. Holy Moly versus Worms in our first plus 12 of this Mythic Dungeon International here. This will be game 2, the Dawnbreaker. Now this will be match point for Holy Moly, so if they take this one, they'll be moving on. Worms, small though they are, have a lot to prove as they come in here and represent the Chinese region and all of the competition that they can bring to the table. This will be a tough one, but I believe in them. Let's see how they are able to tackle it, Makes.
Yeah, let's see. And I have good news for you. Some changes. We're not seeing the augmentation. We're not seeing the Warlock on the side of Worms. But then Holy Moly have decided to actually go into warrior territory. So big surprises on both sides.
I love the Prot Paladin. I think the Prot Paladin for both of these compositions is actually super sick. This dungeon is one that has a lot of value of that Avenger Shield silences, and I think that being able to get those free kicks with that Avenger Shield is actually a huge deal. And now, Holy Moly on the left side of our screen here have done what I would describe as a rolling bloodlust. Look at this. They bloodlust the first pull, and then they only had it for about 20 seconds, and now they've tried to take this bloodlust and take it into the second pack, and they actually pull that commander on top of this Nightfall Ritualist. Pulling, basically whenever you pull this Ritualist, if it's still on top of that landing, it actually won't come all the way into the pack unless you let it complete the RP of which it runs down the stairs. But Holy Moly, just take the commander to it. The downside of that is you can accidentally get in combat with some of these Shadow Mages that you see Wally on the side of Holy Moly fighting. They can actually be really dangerous because then they can just start bolting you randomly. But Holy Moly don't care. They just press all their defensive. They have that Bloodlust rolling, and they actually don't see this as necessarily a problem. And they are very quickly onto the sides of the Dawnbreaker, where Worms trailing behind a little bit off the back of not pressing that Lust.
Yeah, so this comes kind of back to what we were talking about. I'm really curious on where Worms is going to be deciding to send that Bloodlust, whether it is that court area with the boss where we've seen it in Group A, Group B, or if they maybe have some other plans for this, but we're going to be keeping our eyes open as one team have used that Bloodlust already on Holy Moly. But let's talk about the brown class in the room, because I'm really excited to see that warrior come into play here for Holy Moly.
Yeah, Arms Warrior actually a specialization that has a lot of burst AoE this expansion. We actually saw it in Group B be used with pretty limited value, but it actually looks pretty good whenever we saw it the few times we saw it in Group B. I'm kind of interested in seeing what the advantages are of it, but I mean, looking at the damage right here, he has that Warbreaker talented, and he is absolutely just popping off on his web mages. There's a couple of pulls whenever they're pretty low mob count that the Arms Warrior really can excel. The issue is whenever you get to like super large trash pulls, like 15 plus mobs, then that Warrior specialization will fall off a bit. That's kind of why the other times that we've seen it, it was in a Mist of Tyr and a Scythe from memory, and so I think that maybe it's something that we're going to see more and more again. an additional advantage of that is that they also bring the battle shout, so 5% attack power for basically your entire composition, aside from that Resto Druid, is a pretty big deal. And I think it's something that's kind of overlooked a lot of the times, but Igloo has been absolutely popping off in terms of DPS. He's been getting those Heart of the Wilds. He was doing like 800,000 DPS randomly on one of those side boat platforms, and right now he's beating Wexy in terms of DPS off the back of, again, having that Heart of the Wild.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because in the group stages we were kind of talking about the difference in healer DPS specifically between like the Disc Priest and the Restoration Druid that we've been seeing a lot, but Igloo really like showing up here and saying, nah, I can do that too. I can also deliver all of that damage to these mobs, and does just exactly that, as both of the teams are on speaker. Shadow Crown, Holy Moly once more takes a lead here and could potentially try to take this series into a 2-0, but there's still plenty of things to go to in this dungeon that Worms could take for them, and specifically the Bloodlust usage to me is kind of the big question of when they're going to do that. Igloo really cutting it close here, but due to being a Druid, it has a little bit of extra timer on Shadow Crown before that orc goes up!
Wally died to the circle. So the circle is actually slightly bigger than it appears on your screen, and this is actually the worst case scenario too, because if you actually die while you're doing that dragon riding scenario,
you cannot be rezzed.
No, you can be rezzed, but your corpse has to fall all the way to the ground, and it's like a 30-second fall before you land on the ground, and then you can be battle rezzed. And then so he is going to be able to be resurrected here in a couple of seconds, but his corpse still hasn't teleported to the Dawnbreaker yet.
Yeah, so it's a little bit dependent on where you fall, because you can fall on the outer edges of the ship, in which case you won't be in line of sight for a res. So that might have happened here, depending on what's happened for Wally. No. But they will definitely need to play this out like they're doing it right now, as it doesn't seem like they can get Wally for the group here. Worms using this as a chance to maybe catch up.
His body not? Like you said, maybe there's some spot. I've been hit by this.
Don't ask me how I know this.
I've been hit by it, which is how which I got ported to the boat. Fortunately enough, apparently sometimes you don't. That's really unfortunate. I mean, Worms now have to be in a great position. They have their Bloodlust available as well, where Holy Moly ended up pressing that Lust earlier on. And so now Worms are going to be able to have one of those pull enablers that we were kind of talking about with that Bloodlust. Now, Holy Moly does still get Speaker Shadow Crown killed off a little bit faster than Worms, even with that even with those 4 players. But now they have to wait for Wally to finish this dark Speaker Shadow Crown dark cast scenario before he's even able to release and make it to the rest of the group.
Yeah, that's right. So this is usually a benefit that teams utilize, that you can leave the ship already while that cast is happening and then be in this house before the trash even spawns. But Wally will come in late here, is back with the group now, and will add anything that has been on the stairs probably to the rest of the group, but they have opted to pull everything together. On the right side though, Worms are doing a similar thing, are already in the house as well, and you can see the Paladin running in as MDD Priest does go down here to one of the melees due to pulling healer aggro, it looks like.
I think he was gripping the tank, and he ended up being just a little bit too close to the mini boss as it spawned, or maybe the tank wasn't in the room fast enough prior to that life grip. Ultimately, though, I'm going to say it, I think that the person who is the best person to go down on this pull is probably your Disciplined Priest. He is still able to get that power infusion pressed after he gets res. And dude, Holy Moly on the left side of your screen here, we're able to really kill off a ton of trash rather quickly, whereas on the side of Worms on the right side of the screen, we would kind of expect that Discipline Priest to be a little bit faster than the Resto Druid on a pull like this, but maybe that Resto Druid is just hidden tech.
Well, to be fair, the priest was also dead, so anything that had been precasted needed to be recasted to try and get this back together, so maybe not the priority here due to some unforeseen changes, but for Holy Moly, that's right, we're at Grandma's house, like you call it, Tettle, so we're going to be going there for Worms as well, and that is a pull that has gone awry for teams in the past. There's a lot of damage that goes out that teams will need to lift, and for Holy Moly, Moly, that seems to be working out here as the mobs drop lower and lower. One more time, those Black Edge casts will come in, but they are doing fantastic. And once again, that poll is already finished while Worms just arrived.
This comp from Holy Moly just does so much damage. While it's on a 12 and we have that Xalatath's Guile that we were talking about, we were worried that the mobs were going to live for a little bit longer than we had seen on other dungeon levels. This comp from Holy Moly is absolutely annihilating this trash. And I think that they're doing a great job as well of having good priority damage. It's not necessarily just their AoE and being able to power through large AoE pools. It's also their priority damage and being able to turn a lot of trash mobs into single target priority and funnel damage. While they're utilizing some of the specializations to be looking to AoE, they're utilizing things such as that warrior to be able to either have like burst AoE, and whenever he's not bursting on AoE, he's actually doing just a lot of single target damage. And I mean, look at this. Holy Moly are able to kill off that orb mini boss while the dark casters and the tacticians are even still alive here. And Holy Moly are posturing to be looking into pulling into a new Bakaj here. They're probably going to grab a little bit more trash. I think you need to be at 93% enemy forces prior to going up to the Dawnbreaker. Now, something that we did see from Holy Moly during the Group B weekend is whenever they were in that dragon riding scenario on Roshanon, they actually dropped off in this area and did a trash pack. There is a question as to whether or not that's actually a viable strategy on a plus 12. If Roshanon is like planted and ends up casting and finishes the cast and it resolves, you end up wiping. And so you're kind of on a timer for killing off a trash pack. I wonder how much more count Holy Moly is going to grab in this courtyard area.
Oh, we have trouble though for Worms, as one of the dark orbs actually has killed the priest once again.
MDD
Is now without healer, as they didn't have that battle res ready yet. It's 20 more seconds before they can res someone again, so they will now need to survive as the healer finds a way back to them. Oh no!
Oh, he got spell warded. He got spell warded. That's actually so clutch on the side of Worms, that prop paladin really bailing them out. They were on the cusp of having another death here.
Well, prop paladin utility coming in clutch for Worms, and they are able to recover this pull, but holy moly, they're on their way through to a noob already, more than halfway done. That bloodlust is going to be ready in a couple of seconds as well, and I do wonder if maybe there's a world where they just pull another like big trash pack onto the boss here and just send everything here, or if we're actually saving it for Roshanon.
We have Ascendance, we have Warbreaker, we have Deathmark, we have Kingsbane. We have basically all of our offensive CDs, so in theory we could maybe do a trash pull on top of the boss like you're saying. But okay, and right on cue here, Teef is actually grabbing some more trash. The boss is actually pretty low. I don't know if they're going to commit all of their offensive CDs here. That seems like that would be maybe a little bit of an overcommit, but they actually are going to press everything. Kingsbane, Deathmark, Ascendance, Warbreaker has also been pressed, and so they're going to just completely annihilate this pack of trash. I think that they're even going to have their Ascendance still rolling by the time this trash is killed off, which may be a little bit of an overcommit in terms of your resources offensively, but I think you'd rather be a little bit safe than sorry here.
Exactly, yeah, I was going to say that. I think you'd rather overcommit just a little bit rather than undercommit. You know, if in practice it was right on the money, then you probably do it here, and then if you have some lucky crits, you're still going to do it. For Worms, though, this is where that Bloodlust has been sent, so now they have that on cooldown as well, together with the pack that we just saw on the side of Holy Moly as well, and you can see that group is dropping rather low, but they are able to recover this. Still 31% to go on the boss, and then they still need to catch up the dungeon pathing towards the Roshanon area.
What did you think about that rolling Bloodlust first pull for Holy Moly, and the fact that they're about to get a second lust here? Do you think that this is a superior strat to what Worms were doing with their lust?
So to me, it depends a little bit on where that second lust is now going to be used and what exactly we're getting out of it. I would assume that teams have tested both, and if they found out that they can just do the Anu pull without needing that lust per se, then you would rather have two uses rather than one, because in that case, coming back to our conversation from earlier, it's not an enabling lust, but rather just a normal lust that gives you some extra damage, in which case you'd rather have two of those, right?
Maybe this is where that prop paladin comes in handy, right? Where you can just like do that pull without the lust anyways, because you have many free kicks from Avenger Shield and Divine Toll.
I mean, we definitely saw some great benefits of that paladin there for Worms, like we were calling out on the death of the healer. And I think with the interrupts, you're spot on as well. It's a lot of utility that class can offer. Now, I will say the Vengeance Demon Hunter has a lot of CC abilities as well, where they just offer to the group. So I'm not sure if that's the precise reason for the pick, but they're definitely looking very solid here in this round.
Holy moly, Bloodlusting Phase 1 here. I'm actually a little bit surprised. More often than not, you'd actually be wanting to lust the Phase 2 area in terms of just being able to get the maximum amount of damage possible here. But it looks like they're actually committing to the Lust Phase 1. They're popping that Heart of the Wild. I would have assumed that they would have gotten a little bit more damage from Igloo actually being able to contact the boss a bit more, as opposed to having to run and do that bomb scenario. What you saw a little bit on the left side of your screen from Holy Moly is whenever those bombs came out, the only people who actually interacted with the bombs were Teef on that Prot Paladin, and he did it whenever the boss was casting the AoE, and Igloo did the far side bombs, and so it was allowing Soda, Wexy, and Wally just to be able to hit the boss with 100% melee uptime. And so I guess that Bloodlust does make sense. I think it's a bit unconventional compared to what you would be looking to see maybe on like a live key scenario. But if they've tested it and it seems like it's higher boss DPS, I mean, it's really cool strat because it's not something that's commonly seen.
So something that I think many people are not aware of is that you can try to elongate Phase 1 of Rashanan, where if you don't send all of the bombs insta, but you try to send them at last second, you can kind of elongate the phase, and then that damage is still going to count towards the boss HP here in Phase 2. So maybe they just felt like that's a more worthy use of that Bloodlust, since that second phase might be just a bunch shorter than the lust would actually be. So that's kind of what I'm thinking while we're doing this, but it definitely works out for them. They're nearly finished with this dungeon.
I mean, by elongating the phase, you'd have to like blow up a bomb or something, right? Like, that doesn't seem very good.
No, not that much, but just a couple of seconds by waiting until the last second to throw the last bomb.
Oh yeah, I mean that's to allow your 2 minutes to come up perfectly. You have the Ascendance and the Death Mark coming up. Like, I mean, look at it right now. Yep. If you press your CDs flush on cooldown, that Phase 1 lines up perfectly for having your 2s come up in that Phase 2. As Holy Moly on the left side of your screen here are able to dispatch Rashanan and are able to take the series down 2-0, making Rook's predictions null and void.
No, wow.
Oh, our host is muted.
Oh, you know, I actually all this
That's
sass.
2 down.
I just decided.
Two
I was
down,
like,
4 to go.
Like, I don't need this sass in my life. No, look, I wanted to believe. Congratulations to Holy Moly. You crushed Worms. You broke the Dawnbreaker that broke you several times. But, you know, Worms put up a good fight, and honestly, it was great to see Holy Moly back in there and bringing it in a dungeon that's given them difficulty at a +12 at that. So, very cool. And I mean, as we kind of assess and look over this map for them, I mean, Tettles, even with your sass, I'll call you out here. What did you think seeing Holy Moly go through this one?
I actually thought the Warrior pick was like fairly solid, even though Wally ended up going down on the first boss. I think that all of the damage that Warrior ended up providing, in addition to the Battle Shout, it seemed like it was actually a very solid pick. Relative to how large the pulls are going to be in this dungeon. A lot of these pulls are pretty low mob density, kind of similar to like the Mist of Tyrannus Scythe, and I think that it kind of has me questioning, are we going to see that Arms Warrior again in that Mist of Tyrannus Scythe this weekend, and just continuing to utilize that specialization in this low mob density dungeons?
Yeah, I mean, we'll go into our replay here, and Zyronic, as you watched this, what were some of your thoughts?
My overarching thought was that was a lot cleaner than I expected it to be for the first 12 that we saw on broadcast, and it was a great performance from both teams. Couple of unfortunate plays for the squad here, as Wally did go down on the first boss here. There is reason for this, though. So he was actually at the front of the boat, and I think we got a POV of where his dead body is. He's actually like on top of the mast. The hitbox of that intermission sphere is quite a bit larger than it seems. Really unfortunate death position here, by the way. But in the front and back of the boat, it looks a little bigger. So maybe he just got caught off by that animation. The question that I was kind of curious, and I think Lamike was talking to Lamike about this in the replay channel earlier while we were watching this match. He maybe could have gotten a res off here, because you can mount in combat, and while the beams are going, the paladin maybe could just like bubble and fly over and get a res off. Maybe not something they want to, go for. I'm not sure. It's a thought, though. Maybe you could have sped up that boss.
Igloo could have done it with instant cast flight form. It could have been. It's probably possible. It doesn't. I mean, that seems really sketch to actually go.
It is definitely sketch. Yeah.
All right. Moral of the story, guys: do not fly in front or behind the Dawnbreaker. You're going to get killed. Like, stop doing it. Like I see it happen in Pugs too. Stop. Just stop going there.
So you can also land on side bits. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, just stay away from the boss. It's a bigger hitbox than it seems. I've seen too many deaths of that. Happens to the best of us. Happens to MDI players. Overall, though, like you were saying there after the dungeon there, the arms pick is really interesting. We've seen it a lot in Mists of Tyrna Scythe, where you want to have consistent damage for every pack in the mage, and I think they're kind of pulling that idea and putting it into other dungeons as well. I wouldn't be surprised if they have this prepped for other keys as well, because the idea behind arms is you just have cooldowns avatar specifically available for pretty much every single pack, right? You have 45-second cooldowns as an arms warrior, so you can always do damage, and that helps fill the gaps of the 2-minute cooldowns of your other specs. Kind of like the prop paladin does, but of course they also have the prop paladin, so this comp pretty much has damage on every single pull. There's never really any downtime pulls for them. So I like the idea from the comp from them, and the fact that we had a 15-minute plus 12 with only one death is kind of crazy, man. That's an incredibly fast dungeon for a hard key.
I think they could get that down to 14 minutes. Like,
easily.
I see the vision for a 14-minute Dawnbreaker if their warrior doesn't die.
Yeah, that was brutal at the start, and especially too when you're stranded there, just watching as the team is just out of range, trying to get back in. I mean, that was a huge time loss for them, obviously, and it was something that I'm sure that they immediately were just like, okay, of course, this is what's going to happen now. But all the rest of that, like you said, so smooth, especially for our first plus 12. And Dawnbreaker, even at the lower key levels, has been something that has led to a lot of deaths. So well done on both teams' sides. And we'll be looking at the bracket to move ahead here. Now, of course, we'll have our teams here. Holy Moly will be facing off against Perplexed. But as we look at everything else with our lower bracket and what's ahead for Mandatory and Missed Count, Zyronic, what are you feeling?
This is a really interesting matchup, because obviously Mandatory should be the standout favorite, and I still think that they are. I personally did predict 2-0 for Mandatory, but I think this is a really interesting matchup for Missed Count, which is a team who's going to have to feel like they have something to prove, in my opinion, right? They should have been, based off of what their potential was, the second seed team out of Group A, but they just had a couple of really bad dungeons up against Polish Mountain, which ended up costing them a chance to go up against Mandatory in the Grand Finals. So Missed Count definitely has something to prove here. I would be on the lookout for them to have some very fast runs, but I still suspect that Mandatory should be the favorite in this matchup.
I will say, and it's just a small comment, but looking at Group B and some of the timers, maybe Mandatory also has something to prove.
Ooh, interesting. I actually feel like Mandatory was a little bit less consistent than I was kind of hoping for them to be. I feel like this is the most likely matchup to actually see an upset in this first round is between Missed Count and Mandatory. Most of that comes down to the fact that Missed Count probably shouldn't be like one of the third seeds. Like, they shouldn't have gotten third place in Group A. They ended up fumbling a little bit. Now, there's kind of a question of, are Missed Count going to be able to improve a lot? Kind of like Zyro was mentioning, or Mandatory like going to stay the course, like Makes was kind of alluding to, because I think that we kind of expected Mandatory to be this kind of deathless juggernaut, and they looked kind of vulnerable in Group B. Like, I think there was a lot of ceiling for them to actually be able to achieve if they just stopped having deaths like altogether, because that's kind of what we expect from them.
Yeah, we do. And, Missed Count, they've had some great moments. I mean, there was that amazing sort of pre-shell Skarnbird, which is the only one that we've seen so far that was actually managed to get pulled off. But then there have been these other places where they've really struggled, they've stumbled, we've seen them make mistakes that I think we really weren't expecting them to. And true to their name, here or there have been some moments where Count has seemed a little bit less predictable, some planned places, right? So It's sort of hard to say exactly how they'll play, but I think everybody's making some really great points between these two. They're both powerhouses, and Mandatory has had their moments of weakness as well. So, I think it's anybody's game here, even with Mandatory looking strong. This will be a big one that we'll have coming up after the break as these two powerhouses go head to head. So, everybody, make sure that you stick around, get a drink, get a little beverage, and we'll be back with you in just a few minutes. Thanks for sitting tight, everybody. We are back with even more action here in the first day of our Global Finals weekend. We have mandatory versus missed count. So if you haven't yet, be sure to get your predictions into the chat. We'll cover ours in a little bit, but before that, we have some topics to talk about here. And one in particular that all of you in chat actually helped contribute to. So we saw here in the last couple weekends a new world record set for the MDI with a 740 necrotic wake run by mandatory, and over 13,000 necrotic wakes were then run with Raider IO's replay race feature active to compete against mandatory's world record time. And of those runs, these are our winners. So, I mean, Dratnos, you walked us through this when we were first telling everybody about it, but this was pretty cool to see how this all worked out with everyone, right?
Yeah, so our friends over at Radar.io set this up where you could basically race against Mandatory's time in your own key. And they ran a competition for this with some prizes. And one cool stipulation was you didn't have to do it at +9 like Mandatory did. So a lot of people, of course, ran it on +2 as you could do the fastest there. Even still, only one team in the world got sub 10 minutes on that +2. And nobody beat Mandatory's 7-minute and 40-second timer, even though they were 7 key levels higher in that run than you were allowed to in this competition. So I think that just goes to show how absurdly fast and optimized Mandatory's route was. 7 minutes, 40 seconds was just such an unbelievable time. But congratulations to all these teams that ran this challenge, and thanks again to Radar.io for helping put that together. It was very cool to see. Again, over 13,000 dungeons were run using this, which is an amazing amount of participation.
Yeah, a huge
I would also
amount of
like
people.
to like to point out that I'm very glad that they pointed out that the Europe is better than NA and Oceanic as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Yes, all right.
Very important.
All right, you two. No, I mean, it was super cool to see how many people got in on this and gave it a shot themselves. And for those of you who did, huge congrats, huge props to you for giving it a go. I mean, it just goes to show how intense these runs are, even when we get to just see them being done here live on stream and made to look relatively easy-ish by comparison, right? So awesome job to everybody who ran, and keep an eye out in the future. Maybe we'll have more of these. Who knows? It was a great time. But you know, we talked a little bit about Mandatory there, right? They've set some world record runs. They have done a lot this weekend, but missed count is one that we have been keeping an eye on ourselves. And Nagura, we were kind of talking about the fact even before the break that missed count maybe hasn't been living up to expectations. And I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because missed count, I mean, they've been competing for a little while, but I still consider them like somewhat new, right? If you compare it to some of the other veteran teams, right? And whenever they started competing for the first time, they did so incredibly well that at some point we just like immediately put them up into this like really high standard level where we're like, oh, if they don't meet our standards here, then they're underperforming. So I do still want to say that they're not as experienced as some of these other teams, and that the fact that they didn't perform as well as they did previously in their group stage, I feel like it can happen, right? I still think that they have a good opportunity to just do really well in this global final. Like maybe the affix changes, because it was a huge and plus overhaul with the war within coming, of course. Maybe it threw them off a little bit. Maybe they had a bad day when they ended up losing against Polish Mountain. Either way, I do think that they're a really, really good team and that they have lots of potential. And yeah, I mean, their performance speaks for itself usually.
Yeah. And I mean, even with some of the little stumbles here or there, I mean, again, we see these shining glimmers of exactly why everybody got behind them in the first place. So yeah, maybe they've had a little more time now to kind of acclimate, adjust, and to sort of decide what they want to do and focus in on that. But we'll see if maybe we all felt the same with some of our predictions, which will be coming up down below. Now, I'm hoping that I have a little better luck with this one because I put a little bit too much faith in people taking at least one map, and I think I've learned a little bit better since then. Oh, let's see. Nope, I did it again. So, yeah. I mean, okay, 2-0 on everybody. Thanks, Makes.
You know,
Thank you.
Rook, I do appreciate that somebody is going against the grain, that somebody is not afraid to be the odd one out, the, you know, hero of the underdogs. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for putting such a good spin on this. Yeah, hero of the underdogs, Rook, that's me. Now, Migs, why did you lean towards Mandatory? Why are you feeling so confident in them?
Okay, listen. I've been a long time a mandatory believer. When they first came onto the scene, I already knew something was up. I predicted when they usurped the MDI for the first time and took that win. So I just feel like I owe it to them to give them a clean 2-0 prediction. I do think Miscount could take a map, though.
Okay, that's what I like to hear. Yes, more of this. Nagura and Dratos, why do you think that Miscount is going to take one map? I'm kidding. Nagura, I mean, do you think there is a possibility? Is there, what does Miscount need to do here? We'll look at the dungeons here in a moment, but what do you think they need to do to be in the running?
Okay, so I personally don't think this is as one-sided as our predictions may make it seem. Because of course Mandatory is the favorite, right? They won their group, but Miscount, as we talked about, maybe underperformed a little bit and ended up getting 3rd place when maybe they should have been 2nd. So if they cleaned up the mistakes and the things that they did wrong for the group stage now and live up to their expectations as we talked about, then this is a match that can be incredibly close and could also go really easily Miscount's way. I personally don't think this is a super clear Mandatory favorite. Now, are they the favorites? Yes. But is it going to be super one-sided? I don't necessarily think so.
Okay. And Dratos, looking at these map bans, what do you think about their picks?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So Mandatory taking out the Dawnbreaker, Miscount taking out the Siege of Borealis. So neither team has banned that Grim Batol, which is one that I'm curious to see if either of these teams have something like the Perplexed Warlock Grim Batol strategy planned out, because I think that looked extremely good. We are going to start off in the Stone Vault, though, which is another dungeon where we see things often look a little bit different than the other dungeons. This is a huge Unholy Death Knight specialty dungeon, or at least it's often been for a lot of our other teams. This is also one of the places where we've seen some of the most casters, we've seen Aug Evokers, Moonkins, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of different ideas brought to bear here. So question is, have either of these teams got something different planned, maybe to make that Skarmorak 7-minute Bloodlust pull melt even quicker, or pull even more trash onto it more reliably, more safely? What exactly is the idea here? Because Mandatory are coming into this tournament as, I would say, the favorite for this tournament. So do they have further innovation here? We definitely have some differences going on. Miscount are deploying the Warlock in here. I like that a lot. And it does look like the Unholy DK is only on the side of Mandatory, so no Death Knight in Stone Vault for Miscount. A very interesting, probably the first team we've seen do that in a while.
Yeah, very interesting comp here coming in by Miscount. I do like the Warlock. We've seen it now a lot more. We definitely saw it pop up here and there, but now in a global final, a lot of teams choosing to play that Warlock in some of these dungeons. Very cool to see. We'll see what exactly can show here and what kind of tricks they maybe use with the gateways. We're going to keep an eye on that, as Mandatory, of course, sticking to a little bit more of the standard comp. Both teams, of course, pulling everything that they can here at the very start. Looks like Mandatory did manage to finish off the 2 golems that spawned the boss a little bit faster, so they're able to engage the boss quicker. And neither of the teams ended up using that Bloodlust. That's something we've seen in Stone Vault a lot, where they're just saving it for a bigger pull later on.
Yeah, the lust for something like the Skarmorak pull. The downside of that is you're definitely only going to get 1 Bloodlust in the dungeon if you use that. Whereas if you lust the first pull, you might be able to get one at the end of the dungeon, but that locks you into those exact 2 lust timings. Mandatory are indeed the team to get this boss pulled a little bit quicker. I actually really like Miscount's composition here, though. I think the Warlock is really cool. You can do a lot of priority damage on it. You can also carry AoE when you want to, and either of those gets enhanced really well by a power infusion from your priest. And then one problem I've had with Warlock in this dungeon before is that it sometimes seems like you're sort of fighting the Unholy DK, and if you pop off, your Unholy DK is going to lose value. If your Unholy DK pops off, you're going to lose value. So swapping out the DK for the Warlock instead of one of the other 2 DPS, I think is a really clever way to do this. It's something that, going into this dungeon, I would have thought, okay, they're just, the Unholy DK is probably the thing I would want to change the least. But looking at it more, I actually think Miscount have a really cool idea here. It'll have to pay off on that Skarmorak pull. That's where we would see this comp really shine, maybe.
Yeah, I think so as well. That's what we are going to take a look at later on, and that's probably also where both of these teams, as we talked about, are going to be committing their bloodlust. So they're definitely only getting one lust in this dungeon at this point, because we've seen a Stonevault run earlier by Holy Moly, and it was in 11 minute 32. So if they lust maybe this pull now, they still wouldn't be able to get another lust if they're going to be as fast as Holy Moly, approximately, which I do believe both Mandatory and Miscount would be able to do. But now they are gathering up that second trash pull after finishing up the first boss within 3 seconds of each other. But Miscount having so many problems as Kira does go down on the gather of this pull. And this is just a full wipe for Miscount. Just disaster coming in for them right after the first boss.
So there goes our hopes of seeing whether their best run would stack up with Mandatory's best run. I think there was definitely a chance of it, right? They were 3 seconds slower on their first boss split, but I think this comp maybe would have shined. I think this pull in particular is a great spot for that Warlock. Doing 2 big pulls back to back as well is something where the Warlock can often be a little bit better than the DK, because you're not really as cooldown reliant. I mean, both specs can just do big AoE on demand, but the Warlock is just kind of always happy. You just always spamming Rain of Fires, whereas the DK, you know, it can be the one where you have your Unholy Assault and your A-Bomb, you're going to do a lot more damage than the one where you don't. So I think this could have been an opportunity for Miscount, but now their tank going down once again. We are very much not going to see anywhere close to Miscount's best run in this dungeon. They are now 10 deaths in. This is just so catastrophic for them. Mandatory have a huge advantage. Not only did they successfully do this pull, which Miscount are trying to keep alive, but now that Affix has buffed these mobs as well. They're trying to recover this, but Last Resort isn't available. Power or Pain Suppression comes out, trying to keep the tank alive, but the rest of the group in some danger here as well. Miscount are going to try and recover this, but 11 deaths on the board. It's so much. 12 deaths now. That is 3 minutes of death penalty that will be applied to Miscount. Mandatory just have to not die, and if Mandatory don't wipe, they are going to win this dungeon by minutes.
Yeah, this is just a disaster for Miscount. The mobs initially didn't reset fully, as everyone had died. Kira did walk back, still was in combat with the mobs, had to die again. Then they again tried to gather the pool. Kira going down another time, the mobs not resetting properly, getting that affix buff and everything. The casters in the back just constantly casting these allo bolts, not being able to interrupt them. And yeah, just disaster. Up to 12 deaths now. They are moving on, and obviously they're going to be continuing in this dungeon, but it's going to be very, very tough. Of course, at this point, Mandatory would have to have some super major mistakes on their side as well, which, to be fair, it can happen if Mandatory is going to be doing that Skymarak pull that we've talked about. That is going to be happening after this boss, if they're attempting that pull. Like, Mandatory at some point will, of course, know what has happened to Miscount, and they will be aware that they're so far ahead. So it's possible that they maybe go a little bit slower, but then at the same time, we've talked about this before, where some of these MDI teams going slower isn't necessarily safer for them if they have practiced certain pulls and certain timings with their cooldowns throughout the dungeon, and maybe also just practicing them as well, right? So we'll see if Mandatory is going to decide to do that same Skymarak pull and commit that Bloodlust. But we will never know if this is now their strategy moving, like if that's actually what they planned on doing, or if they could go faster, right? That's only something we'll know when they do this dungeon again a second time, and it might be a bit closer against another team.
Yeah, exactly. At this point, Mandatory definitely know that Miscount have had this happen. So if they have any strategy that they think is only like a 20%, even a 20% chance of failure, you wouldn't do that anymore. You would just be like, yep, we're going to take 3 extra pulls in this area to reduce our chance of wiping by even a small amount, because wiping is the big way that Miscount could come back into this if that happens on the side of Mandatory. And I mean, yeah, this is a section of the dungeon where tank deaths are unfortunately extremely common. Those little forge hands do so much damage to the tank, so a shame to see that happen for Miscount, especially here in the Stone Vault. You know, the Stone Vault was an unbannable map in this series. Perhaps an indication that this was maybe, you know, maybe best case for Miscount is, I'm not sure. I mean, this sort of thing, sometimes it just happens. Sometimes, you know, you practice a dungeon 50 times, it works out 50 times, and then you get to live, you get in your tournament match, and just something goes wrong that never went wrong before. But yeah, that area in particular, it's such a common issue for tanks. You would hope that they've got it prepped, but Mandatory are going into Skarmorak. They have hit the Lust. This is their big Unholy DK opportunity. 20 million DPS on their Unholy Death Knight. All the trash still alive as well. The Assassination Rogue damage here is huge as well. And the Assassination Rogue is funneling a tremendous amount of this damage into Skarmorak as well. Part of the reason Skarmorak's dying so much here is this is such a huge pull, and the Assassination Rogue duplicates 5% of all the damage it deals to everybody else into that primary target. So as you have the pull be that large, you just get huge extra boss damage. They're going to break through that shield at 22% when the shield starts, and the boss is going to die well before it gets another one. Incredible performance from Mandatory on that pull. This is going to be a very fast run out of them.
That looks so clean. Like, they did have all of those mostly as that fortified shell came in, so didn't have any of those overlaps with the AoE damage coming through. So absolute clean pull by Mandatory, and didn't really go slower. I'm pretty sure this is like the absolute maximum they can do. They didn't slow down. It's possible they thought about it, but no, they did execute this pull. Now we do see a skip coming through into the doorway. I like to skip a lot. We've seen teams attempt these skips before, where they walked out with the mobs and then they came back in and shadow melted. But sometimes it didn't work out, and the whole setup took a lot longer than just not skipping them. But Mandatory executing it really well without having too much travel time. And now they gather up all of the rest of the pool onto Eirik here. So another insane pull coming up by Mandatory back to back.
So a glimmer of hope for Missed Count is they have also done their Lust pull here onto Skarmorak, and it's also looked good up until now. Now Crims has died twice. The death into the Ankh, into the death again. The Fortified Shell, though, okay, so the good news if you're a Missed Count fan, they pushed Skarmorak lower, even with those deaths, than Mandatory did. So again, maybe this comp has some silver linings. Maybe it can actually be superior strategically, but the execution just not coming through for Missed Count. The deaths here up to 14 on the scoreboard for them as Mandatory are marching to the finish line. The last Rock Smasher going to be going down here for them in a moment, and they will just have the boss. No Lust, but no problem. And look at the timer at the top here. The only way, they weren't going to get a second Lust in this dungeon pretty much no matter how they did this. If they did, they would have had to press it right at the start and then right at the very end.
Yeah, looking at this run, right? The boss already down to 44%. The fastest run we've seen earlier by Holy Moly was 11:32, and Mandatory is definitely going to be beating that. So Holy Moly does have to take a look at what Mandatory is doing here and maybe adjust their run a little bit. Of course, Holy Moly did have 2 deaths in their run, while Mandatory is still on a 0 death run. So Mandatory doing an incredible job and super, super clean execution here on their side. Miscount, more mistakes, unfortunately, at this point. At this point, they know, they're just,
You're hoping for some kind of unfathomable catastrophe for Mandatory, but realistically, if you're Miscount, you're already thinking about the next map in the series. You got to make sure that one looks a little bit better than this one, but Mandatory, perfection on the left-hand side of the screen, a 10:37 Stone Vault plus 11. Absurdly well played by Mandatory. That's going to take them to a 1-0 lead in the series.
Mandatory setting new records left and right and smashing new records as well. They just cannot be stopped. They are only continuing to pick up more and more steam. Amazing to see them here in this Stone Vault really just go for it. And unfortunate over on Miscount's side with those deaths. Of course, you reach a point where I just think there's no real return, and they still hung in there. So they're going to have to pull it together as we move forward. But Mandatory's performance was definitely pulled together in comparison. And looking at it, Nagura, Mandatory, they just keep getting stronger and stronger. How are they looking in this one?
Yeah, this run was incredible. I did think that maybe they're going to slow down a little bit considering what happened to Miscount. And honestly, I'm not 100% sure if they did. I don't know how they could have gone any faster, but it might be possible that they can do this even slightly quicker. Maybe they were, stopping here and there, waiting for like a cooldown or something. Instead of immediately gathering up everything. So maybe just would have been a couple of seconds that they could have been faster. But yeah, this was an insane run.
Yeah, Makes, what did you see as you were analyzing the map?
So I was really hoping to see some good tech out of the Warlock. I will say, I think with the unfortunateness that happened there for Mistcount, I think they probably opted to not even show anything off because they knew they were that far behind. You can see it here one more time. Kira unfortunately dying first, and then that just started a chain of people staying in fight while they're like wiping, and then the next person releases, and you have this kind of chain reaction of deaths that unfortunately put Miscount into a position where they knew that this map was probably not going to be a win for them. So shout at them for still trying to finish it out and, hoping for maybe a little bit of a miracle. But I did want to highlight a couple of things on the side of Mandatory because, like you're mentioning, Nicorette, they did not slow down. And sometimes in the MDI teams don't slow down because that messes us with their cooldowns, right? They practice it a certain way and they just want the cooldowns to line up in that. So if they do smaller packs, then suddenly things are weird. But still, this very big pull here on Skarmorex going well for Mandatory, finishing it really, really quickly, doing a great damage on that unholy DK here. Love to see it, personally speaking. But we also saw a great skip. So that's something that we were talking about in the group stages that some teams were doing and some teams were not doing, and we were kind of trying to figure out whether or not it's worth it to do skips. This skip here I think is super worth it. Look at how fast they are. So Skylark is in there, has pulled everything to the side, has utilized the cage from the Demon Hunter as well to make sure that the casts are not being a problem, and then the rest of the team just uses that Shroud to get by. They have everything grouped back up together, and then they can just skip that really, really annoying pack that they don't want to deal with here, that they don't need for count, and have a little bit of an easier time with this trash pack into Iric. I really like this skip, and I think more teams are probably going to be trying to replicate this.
Honestly, it was so smooth, and even just you taking us through it with the perfect footage. I mean, props to our production. I was like,
yes, shout out production.
Look at
also,
that.
Dratnos, how dare you cast or curse Miscount? I heard it. I heard you say
Dratnos.
This was going great, and suddenly they all died. What happened there, Dratnos?
Well, it was going great, and then they all died, and then it wasn't going great anymore. These things happen.
Maybe not as articulate as Mace's
them.
breakdown we just saw, but, that was to the point, Dratnos. It was to the point.
It was all going so well until it wasn't.
That is true.
It's true. And obviously, Miscount now, they're going to be looking at lower brackets unless they are really able to swing this back in their favor. So, Dratnos, from your side, I mean, you can be a little more verbose or just as succinct if you want, but Miscount, what's ahead for them? What do they need to do?
So we move into a Grimbatol, which is another dungeon where things can go wrong in big ways a lot. And
I did want to just quickly say the Warlock. Like, we've seen the Warlock earlier, right? And we just saw that Miscount can play the Warlock. So maybe if they have the same idea as Perplexed had earlier, then maybe that's what they need to do to win here.
Yeah, Miscount has Thanner, right? And Thanner can play pretty much any spec in the game, which is a huge benefit when you do have... I mean, we've seen him flex onto the Ret Pally, the Survival Hunter, the Warlock, the Unholy DK. He can play it all. I hope that Warlock gateway tech is something that more teams will use as well. I think it's really cool in this dungeon. But I think that when you look at where things first went wrong for Miscount, it was a tank death on a difficult tank pull. Grimbatol has like 7 of those pulls. So we need to see that not happen for them. That's going to be the big thing they need to clean up, I think.
I will also say we did see Miscount in the Grimbatol, and arguably that was Group A, so it's been a while, and teams obviously have practiced more and adapted, and it's a little bit different now, but they also had 5 deaths in that Grimbatol and lost the map to Perplexed when they played it, and that was the only time we've seen them here, so maybe it's a little bit of a redemption moment for Miscount, since they knew that that was a dungeon that they didn't do too well in, so they definitely practiced it very, very closely, and now are gods at it.
Make's really putting a lot on Miscount here. Yeah, I believe that they are gods.
You predicted 2-1. Come on.
I mean, that's true. You know what? I need them to be gods in this one. So, you know what? Miscount coming in as gods here for Game 2, Grimbatol. Mandatory already reigning supreme, but trying to hold on to that here in our Global Finals weekend. Now, they have match advantage on this, so if they take this one, they are going on in the upper bracket. Miscount has a lot to prove, and they need to do it here and now, though, of course, if they move down, they'll still be able to redeem themselves. But I'm saying Miscount make it right here, make it count. And let's get into this. I mean, game 2, Grim Batal. This is going to be mandatory versus missed count. Go for it, Dratnos.
Okay, so no Warlock here. We are going to see mirror comps between the two teams. This is, in fact, this is the comp I would describe as all reliable. Vengeance Demon Hunter, Resto Druid, Enhancement Shaman, Assassination Rogue, Frost Death Knight. These are kind of our most common specs, so we're not going to see any of those cool gateway techs prepared for either of these teams, although I think one thing that I would maybe look for is maybe Mandatory will come in on Saturday and Sunday with that prepped for this dungeon, because I do think it might be faster. That's one of those adaptations that teams are sometimes able to do between tournament days. Either way, both teams are starting off with the exact same pull here with this big lust, grabbing as much as they can, and we're looking to now see the tanks go and grab a bunch of trash. It's actually missed count that finished the pull first, so that's great news for them, as now both tanks are running and are going to get set up, grouping together a bunch of enemies for the remaining 4 members of the team to bombard with these dragons.
Yeah, one thing to note here is that Mandatory did this thing that we've seen earlier, where they used their Bloodlust immediately as they walked into the dungeon before they even gathered up anything, to be able to get the Bloodlust back at the very end of this dungeon, because we do know this one is a really close one where you get the Bloodlust at the very end. If you want to have it at the start of the last boss pull. Miscount did save it a little bit, so we'll see if that is going to make a difference later on. But yeah, both teams did manage to do the dragon run perfectly. As you can see, the tanks now sitting down and getting their lunch that they do deserve after doing all of the work, while everyone else was just flying around on these dragons, shooting from a far distance. But there we go. Now the team did manage to catch up with the tanks, and Kira and Skylark are gathering up the trash onto the first boss here. It looks like Miscount did manage to deal with all of this slightly quicker, being able to engage the boss a couple of seconds faster.
Yeah, Miscount bombed this pull that they brought into the boss to half health, whereas Mandatory instead have bombed the pull that they will be taking into the boss later. So that's a little bit of an interesting difference in strategies as well. You can see Mandatory having this trash pack live for a little bit longer, but that means when they do go into that side pack, it's already almost dead. Curious to see which of those is going to work out better, but it does seem like somehow, despite the fact that Mandatory pulled this boss a little bit slower than Miscount, they have done a lot more boss damage here on pull.
Yeah, it definitely looks like Mandatory is doing a very great job focusing down the boss here. Yeah, I mean, it's dropping so fast. You can see the trash is still on high HP. It might even... Okay, I don't think the boss will die before the trash, but it is possible as they have so much single target damage coming in. Of course, also the affix buff really helping them out here with the damage to the boss. But all of a sudden, Miscount did catch up a lot on boss DPS now, as the boss now all of a sudden dropped lower for Miscount. The boss might just go down pretty much the same time for both teams. So Mandatory, even though they pulled the boss... few seconds later, did manage to finish the boss off, like maybe a second faster. Yeah, actually a second, you can see in the boss split.
Yeah, so Mandatory with a 1 second lead. Both teams now heading into Forge Master Throngus's area. Shroud of Concealment used for Mandatory to sneak them through. Whereas Miscount are just setting up a pull here. Miscount in combat faster. It's going to be the 2 side pulls plus the Molten Giant pull. Meanwhile, Mandatory grabbing one of these side pulls and taking it forward into the forward Molten Giant and straight into Forge Master Throngus as well. If they can execute this, and if they can maybe chain back into some of that trash behind, they might be able to get a huge advantage out of this, but this is going to be a dangerous pull. A lot of raid damage is going to come out here from the boss, plus that Molten Giant's Lava Wake ability.
Yeah, this is going to be super crazy if Mandatory manages to get both of these trash pulls into the boss at some point. I do think they'll have to finish off at least the Molten Giant first, so that might mean that they have to focus that down a little bit, while Miscount on the other hand pulled the boss later, but they're going to be able to focus all of their damage onto the boss here. So we'll see if that is going to be an advantage for Mandatory or not, the fact that they're pulling all of this. There we go, the Molten Giant does go down for them. They still manage to get the boss really low though, not fully focusing down that Molten Giant, it seems like. They're up to 52% trash now on their side, which means Miscount being a little bit ahead because of that difference in trash pulls there. We'll see if that changes something with the pulls later on. Miscount now also engaging that Molten Giant that Mandatory had already killed. But yeah, they're going to be... Miscount is going to be ahead quite a bit in percentage once this trash rate goes down for them.
Yeah, Mandatory are going to need at least an extra dragon here at the end of this dungeon, but I really like the way Mandatory did this because they got their 2 minutes on boss with that trash pull. Miscount also are getting that they're doing it in sort of a delayed fashion. So this is going to be a little bit of a slower section for Miscount. Mandatory, though, do need more trash to make up for this because they did only get the one Molten Giant pull instead of two. Skylark is going to pop Cheat Death there, that last resort on this big pull as they have another Lava Bender walking in here. Skylark is actually in quite a bit of danger here. This is an extremely scary pull for the tank.
They do have, thankfully, that affix coming in that is going to be helping them out a little bit here. But all of these debuffs coming out, you can see Dwarf Racials have been used. And of course, Mode on that Restored being able to help out with the Dispels here. Skylark looks like he did recover, but it's still very dangerous as the mobs are slowly going down here. They are using all of their utility here, making sure they get as many interrupts out as possible. As Skylark now starts kiting at the very end here, not super confident anymore in being able to survive this, as the affix buff also runs out now at the very end of this run. This was actually a very good timing for that affix, as now they're going to be gathering up another big pull on Mandatory side. And this is a pull where we've seen so many teams struggle with the Destroyer coming in. There's just so much damage onto the group.
Yeah, it's nice for this comp to have a big health target like the Destroyer, but you also have Lava Benders in this pool that you want to be focusing on. So this does add quite a bit of danger here. You do naturally get to line of sight that first knockback, but then you're fighting in this small corridor here. We've seen a lot of deaths on this pull for Mandatory, so hopefully this is something that they are able to avoid that fate that other teams have often suffered with this Destroyer getting added to this pull. A lot of dodging needing to be done. Not a lot of space here. They managed to kill it before the next Umbral Wind cast, which is a really big breakpoint. That is going to mean that this is working out perfectly for Mandatory. They're getting back that count that Miscount picked up in Throngus's area, and they'll be able to march forward. Most CDs were used on that pull, so they're going to have to deal with these Lava Benders and the first phase of this boss without all that much help. And then they'll probably be pulling in that side trash pack with the second phase of this boss. Miscount also have a Twilight Destroyer in on this pull. So Miscount are going to get quite a bit of extra trash here, but I'm not sure what it's going to allow them to skip.
Yeah, so Miscount looks like...
I guess they already skipped some of the side trash in this area. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. They only did this pull. They didn't do the initial pull in Mandatory at the very start. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They skipped some trash on that initial pull. So, yeah, so even though Miscount did do this extra trash pull, they didn't really save anything later on, right? The amount of pulls that Miscount was doing is just like one more at this point, right? So it's definitely more efficient to do whatever Mandatory was doing here when it comes to pull count. And that's why they are ahead at this point, because both teams are still in 0 deaths. Both teams executed their strategy as far as we see and we know cleanly. So Mandatory's route just being slightly more efficient, saving them some time here and there, as Mandatory now reaching or is already in the second phase, and Miscount is just now getting Valiona active.
Breath Syndragosa popped here for Mandatory means that it's probably time to pull this trash in while that breath is still rolling. Breath can last somewhere in that 30 seconds to a minute range, depending on how things go. It looks like it's fallen off already, actually, for them here. Just a 20-second breath, maybe, for Mandatory. So that's going to mean that this trash pack might live for a little while. They could actually be in some trouble here. Hopeful is going to pop those CDs on the boss here, and a lot of that damage is going to splash onto this trash. But this could be a dangerous section here. Cloak of Shadows used to prevent this knockback, but we have some of these Shadow Flame Spirits now. One of them has been CC'd off to the side there. I like that a lot. And they're just going to focus on the boss here and let those other boss ads despawn. So it's going to be okay here for Mandatory, although those Shadow Flame Spirits are chasing players down. They've got to finish this boss here to despawn those spirits. Looks like they are going to be able to do that, stopping that boss fight, and now they'll be able to march on forward here. 89% count. They're going to hug the wall here to avoid pulling that extra dragon. Miscount still have an extra third of that boss to deal with. Mandatory, is it going to be 2 Corruptors? It does look like it. This is a pretty dangerous pull here. Not a lot of space, especially on the stairs like this.
And Miscount also managed to pull their trash into Valiona here as well, and did execute that really nicely as the boss now does go down. We've seen some teams struggle with that pull, but no problem for Miscount, as they're now also moving on. Of course, still a little bit behind at this point, as we'll see if they also gather up all of these corruptors. The one thing for Miscount to do to get back into the game, it would be pulling all of the corruptors, but that is obviously something that is incredibly dangerous. And on top of that, it doesn't necessarily allow you to pull the boss into the corruptors, right? Because you can see Mandatory, they are pulling the boss in just a moment here. So if you pull all 4, there's just no way you can do that, which means that you're not really saving a pull. But yeah, Mandatory looks like they're going a little bit slower. We're just waiting for some of the cooldowns to come up, maybe for Bloodlust, as it's coming up just now, because they pressed it so early in the dungeon. You can see we just now are 10 minutes in, and the Bloodlust is already up, so they pressed it incredibly early.
Yeah, they're going to get this Affix to line up with their Lust and all their CDs as well here. This boss is going to melt for Mandatory. There you go. Every single cooldown popped. 10 stacks of the Affix and Lust as well. Miscount getting into boss combat around the same time as well. They also have Lust available and all their CDs. They are just going straight into boss, taking all these hatchlings in as well. This is a scary thing to do on this boss, because when those hatchlings die, they increase your shadow damage taken, which is what the boss does to you. Mandatory, though, 50% ahead on this boss, thanks to all those CDs. A beautiful lineup of that Affix as well. They just have to avoid any deaths here. They are so far ahead on damage. They also have all their count. Miscount still need to finish off those corruptors, but they can't afford to switch onto them. They need to just focus on this boss to try and claw this back, but I don't think there's any way at this point they're going to have some deaths from those faceless corruptors, mind piercers as well, being active during the boss fight. That's part of the reason it's so dangerous to pull these mobs in at high health into this boss if you have those mechanics going on during the boss mechanics as well. Mandatory here, marching over the finish line. 11 minutes and 15 seconds is going to be their timer here. As that boss goes down, they stop the clock, and they win this series 2-0 over Miscount.
11:15, an impressive time and an impressive run for Mandatory. Now, Miscount had a moment to bring it back, but they're going to have to try to fight for that moment down in the lower brackets, while Mandatory will be moving on, just continuing this powerful roll forward that we've seen from them as they only get more and more momentum. I mean, really impressive here across the board. But, you know, we talked a lot during the map about, Nagura, the particular pacing of trash in this, right? So I was curious, could you touch a little bit more on their routing and what they did in this?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, right? Because we talked about Perplexed Warlock and the Gateway strat and how good we think it is. But now we've seen this route here from Mandatory, and they're 10 seconds faster than Perplexed. And I think it really is because they're skipping this one trash pull that the other teams have been doing. So the pull after the first boss that you do before Thrungus, that one Mandatory didn't do. They just pulled into the boss, and they just pulled extra trash afterwards to make up for the count that they were missing there. And this one pull that they're saving is really what makes a difference here. It's only a 10 seconds difference. And I don't know how much difficulty it really is adding to do it this way, but it seems to be worth it for them.
I mean, yeah, 10 seconds in a speedrunning competition, that's the world. That's huge even. But it seems small. Makes, now, would you take us into what you saw as you went through?
Yeah, so we're actually starting with a pre-lust, and that is not something that we're seeing a bunch of. I think you guys touched on this briefly, but usually we only see teams do this when they think they're going to be like right on the money. They're only going to get a second Bloodlust out of the dungeon if they pre-lust here. Other than that, it's usually not done. Then both of the Vengeance Team and Hunters going for a little bit of a safer option of what we saw from Perplexed. So they were waiting for the first pass of the dragons and then pulling everything together. And you can see how close it got there for Skylark, just barely surviving that barrage of dragon breaths from his teammate as the mobs were chunking down. And here comes the difference that Nagura was just talking about. So we have this pack into boss on Thrungus for Mandatory, whereas for Miscount, they did a pack, then pulled the boss, and once cooldowns were ready, they pulled the Molten Giant pack into the boss as well. And then in order to make up for that, Mandatory needed to pull bigger, and they pulled really big on this specific pull. You could even see Mode running back and grabbing that lava bender contender from the bridge there, which is quite a mob that takes some time to cast and walk and adds some extra difficulty there, but they were able to get it under control. And then they do another big pull right after that, whereas on the side of Mistcount, we didn't see any Warlocks either, but we did see the Shroud skip to try and avoid some of this trash here. I think it comes back to this area. If you pull it as big as Mandatory did, just being faster than the extra pack on the Thrungus area in terms of routing. And then towards the end, I'm not even really sure if that pre-lust was even necessary, because Mandatory had Bloodlust ready, but they had to wait for cooldowns to actually make that Bloodlust make sense. So it was a little bit disjointed in the timing, but eventually was pressed here as the Corruptors did go down. So maybe even a little bit faster than they were in their practice times due to affix spawns or whatever. That's always a little bit of a variety. I really like the route for Miscount, but I just think what Mandatory was doing here was a smidge faster.
I mean, they were able to pull it off, they executed, and that route was so solid. Interesting to see how it'll kind of stand up even against other runs that we've seen that have been faster, other strats, right? Like that gate, we'll see. But, Miscount, unfortunately, some of those deaths and other things just working against them, and with some of this routing, we will see them head down, like we said, to the lower bracket. We'll take a look at those brackets here now as well, because we have another match. We've got a few more going on here for everybody today, but, it's been a great one so far, seeing these teams here as we kick things off with the global finals. Mandatory, like we said, moving on here in the upper brackets, and of course Miscount moving down to join the lower. Next up, we will have our series with Polish Mountain and FTBZM, one of our other teams from the Chinese region. And I think this is going to be an interesting one, because Polish Mountain, they've surprised us this competition. They've shown that they really can run and do these dungeons well. And FTBZM may be coming in here as one that we've kind of expected to fall a little bit lower. But Dratnos, with these two in their matchup, how do you think they're going to kind of stand up to each other?
Yeah, I mean, these are two probably of our biggest underdog unknown teams here that both made it into the global finals. Polish Mountain did so well in their group weekend as well. They massively overperformed expectations there. FTBZM, though, this is a team that has been playing their comp, and they've, unlike a lot of the other teams that have been switching things up and using different classes and specs in different dungeons, they've just been running their 5 main specs basically everywhere. And, sometimes we look at that and we think, okay, that's a disadvantage. But sometimes you get so comfortable on those main specs, and you do things on them in dungeons that other people don't necessarily know that you can do with them, and so that can be a big advantage, especially if, depending on the caliber of team you're up against, if you're just super consistent because you are all playing something that like the back of your hand.
Yeah, I mean, FTBZM, whether or not that comfort's going to work against them or is going to work to their advantage is definitely something that's yet to be seen, because we watched it in those rebroadcasts that you got to do this past week. And for anybody who missed those, a reminder that you can watch them here on the Warcraft channel after we wrap up here if you want. But we saw some interesting comps, and there's been a lot of discussion about how they might hold up. I don't know, Nagura, do you have any follow-up thoughts on how you think that the, Fire Mage, shall I say, shall kind of hold up against what we've been seeing from our other teams?
I mean, I think this match in particular honestly, I think it can go either way, because FTBCM, I do think straight up, if you compare them against each other, I do think that, in my opinion at least, Polish Mountain does have the slight edge over them. But Polish Mountain has been, I do want to say that they have made some major mistakes in their group stage. They lost their very first series against Team Name, actually. They did end up getting second then throughout the lower bracket, right? But losing against Team Name, against the 6th seed when they were the 3rd seed coming in, definitely was not something that we expected to happen. So I do think the Polish Mountain, as they're a new team, right, they can be hit or miss. So I do think that this series can go either way.
All right, well, everybody, we will see which way it's going to go when we come back, but we will be saying goodbye for just a short while as we get everything set up for our final series of the day. So while we'll be away for a little bit, everybody, we hope you enjoy the break, and we will see you back in just a couple minutes.
In World of Warcraft, we're trying to convince you that Azeroth is a real place. Good sound design at WoW, we want things to feel organic, we want things to feel believable. We have to kind of fill in all those blanks because by default, everything's just completely silent. Ambience is always one of the coolest things for us to work on. The zones in The War Within, the sound team really knocked it out of the park. They're lush, they're vibrant, they pull you in and they kind of reinforce what these places are all about, whether they're friendly or hostile, familiar or unfamiliar. Early on, we want to understand what the intent behind what designers and artists are doing. We want to understand why they made those things so that we can match with sound. So we pick up where they leave off and we fill in the blanks, we fill in any of the sounds that are missing, we define what that zone sounds like or what that creature sounds like, and if there's emotional intent or if there's gameplay mechanics, we want to make sure that sound is right there, reinforcing all those things.
Ashkahet is the home of the Nerubian Empire. It's an all-underground biome. I think an important thing to delineate is that while the Nerubians are scary humanoid spiders, they have culture, they have commerce, they are just a fully functioning society. So the overworld, it's bustling. And then the underground portions are corrupted by black blood. So there's kind of two very distinct vibes. The beginning of my sound design process, we try to meet up with world building, or as a team, we will fly through the zone together, just kind of to get an overall feel for it. When they said we need this to feel dark, you're underground, it's hostile, there's crazy old god influence underneath, in my mind, this is going to take a lot of synthesis. That's kind of what I gravitate towards. I wanted to synthesize winds just to make it feel detached from our reality. So I synthesized these on my Moog, going through some reverb, some delay, and some panning. So to contrast that, I really wanted something organic to be the bed. I got our producer Brecken, we got some mics in the Foley room, and we just started hitting anything we could, bowing anything we could, and then we ended up finding these massive springs. The combination of that led to this really incredible rumbly but screechy quality from the giant springs in the bow. I processed it to the point where you would never know it's a spring. It has an organic quality to it because it's air moving, it's a thing vibrating. So I thought that served as a really proper, this is the base ambience of the zone. And then I can populate it with all this crazy synthesized stuff. The trope of a scary thing is the knife sound we all know, the really pitched, high frequency. That's the jump scare, is the big top end. We didn't want it to feel so punishing that you have a daily quest in Ashkahet and you're I can't, it's the morning. I can't be hearing that. Box with contact mics, bowed, building out a lot of the texture of kind of the sounds that surround you as you're flying through Ashkat. I always go in with some intention of I want this sort of texture, or I want this sort of frequency range, and then you just reach for what's around you. It's going in with intention and letting the creativity just take over.
Yeah, we get to play around with when do we want things to be grounded and feel Earth-like, and when do we want them to be abstract and weird. And that's actually one of the big tools we use when we're setting up ambience. Do we want this to feel familiar and safe? Then we're going to lean on using sounds from Earth, right? So we use birds that are recognizable birds, wind sounds, things that you already know are real. That helps communicate familiarity, and familiarity matches safety. As we progress into the depths in the War Within zones, things get more hostile, things get more unfamiliar, and so we lean away from using literal earth sounds, and we lean in on more maybe synthesized things, or taking real sounds but manipulating them enough that you don't quite know what you're hearing.
Hallowfall is the biggest zone in the expansion. It's got a giant crystal, and the crystal actually has two phases. It will go from light into dark or void, and the ambience will shift to convey both of those feelings. When I first saw Hallowfall, the whole area is basically very alien. So I kind of look at it and think of ideas, what comes to mind. Since it's so alien, I went outside the box and thought about utilizing guitar and tonal things like crystals to create new sounds to supplement things like wind. I wanted to use the guitar, and I didn't want it to sound musical. I wanted to use it just to create like broad swaths of ambience that moves and shifts, so it feels like a space, but when you hear it, you're not like, that's a guitar. And I just go from there, create a bunch of source, and then take that source and process it through usually a lot of granular synthesis, different plugins. And I get to pick and choose from those building blocks into creating the end result. And then filtered it. And reverb. Granular synthesis chops up the waveforms into grains and will replay them back in different orders, creating a new sound. When I first try a sound out, it's 100%, I don't know what I'm going to get. So I have an idea, an end goal, but it's basically throwing stuff at the wall until you find what sticks. And then some of the stuff that you think will never work ends up being the best.
You know, my team is always looking for opportunities to do things that are new, novel, maybe new ways to use our existing tools, or maybe we need new tools to try out new ideas for sound. We're always trying to find ways to make sure that the environments are as dynamic as they can be, and that's always an ongoing process. So back at WoW's launch, just due to technical limitations, you really just have a simple stereo loop. Today we have dozens of sound emitters all around you. There's positional stuff happening everywhere you are that I think helps reinforce how real and grounded all of these sounds are. They're not just a file that's playing, it's a soundscape that you're a part of.
I think what makes good sound design at the very base level is serving, in our case, our players. Even before creating a sound, I'm always thinking about like, how is this going to make our player base feel, and is it going to make Azeroth feel like home? Obviously every zone is very, very different and needs its own flavor of that, but I think immersion is number one.
I think what makes good sound design to have the players feel the emotions that you're intending. If you can make them feel what you want them to feel, I think you've succeeded. And also creating a sense of wonder. Oh, what's that? I've never heard that before.
I think the sound team did a really solid job on ambience across the board for the War Within. I think each zone has really unique vibes, and I think if you just spend some time just listening to the sounds that are in each of these places, I think you can really tell the progression from relative safety up above down into some pretty scary stuff down in the depths. I'm really proud of what the sound team came up with there. I think it's worth listening to if you haven't.
good to see you again, chat. We are back for our final series of the day. This is going to be Polish Mountain versus FTBZM. This is going to be an exciting one as both of these teams kind of unexpected coming up through things. So chat, get your guesses in the chat. Let us know who you think is going to take it, because really, honestly, we've been learning a lot about both of these teams as we go through this MDI, and it's been really great to get to see what they've put out there for us to witness with their runs. But we're going to talk a little bit about both of them in more detail, starting off with Polish Mountain. Now, Polish Mountain, we've been getting to know this team here through our groups, and Makes, as you watched their group performances, what sort of stood out to you?
Percent to go. So I actually reached out to them because I was like, okay, it's like a surprise team. We don't really know much about them. What's up with that? How are they feeling? What's the vibe? Kind of thing. And in their very first map, and you're seeing it here against Team Name, they actually unfortunately lost that series and they were sent into the lower bracket. And usually in the group stages, being sent to the lower bracket this early is not a good sign. Not very many teams make it out of a run like this one, but Polish Mountain persisted and clawed their way through and through, beat This Is Almost Fine, beat even the Direwolves, a household name at the MDI and TGP, and then came back in a revenge run against Team Name as well as Missed Count and made it into the very last series against Perplexed. So if there's anything to take away from this team, I think it's that they have the desire and the will to actually make it for as long as needed, no matter how hard those games are going to be going. And they're not scared of a little lower bracket revenge run either.
Not at all. I mean, Polish Mountain, honestly, just like channeling that whole like mountain climbing kind of energy as they just keep reaching higher and higher and climbing their way up the ranks out of that lower bracket. So given how high they've already climbed, we'll just have to see how much further they can go. And FTBZM is a team that we all got to meet in the China rebroadcast or the Chinese live stream, if anybody was watching that directly. And Dratnos, Tettles, you two got a chance to actually watch them. So Tettles, if you don't mind kicking us off, what did you see from FTBZM when you were spectating them?
Yeah, I mean, I guess first let's kind of talk about compositions. They love to run this Fire Mage, Frost Decay, Vengeance Demon Hunter, Resto Shaman, Destro Warlock composition. I had a chance to kind of catch up and kind of ask them a couple of questions, and some of the stuff that I focused on was stuff related to their composition. They said that they can perform at like 95% of their class's potential, regardless of the strengths or the weaknesses of the class. They also stated things such as, except for the Death Knight, most of my teammates are highly skilled players. In terms of quality, it's all about resilience and sticking to their own. So a little bit of banter in regards to the team. I think just overall, they were trying to use strong classes, but they found that they didn't perform super well. Due to real-life reasons, we had limited training time, so we decided to stick to our original compositions. And I think that we saw that time and time again through the China qualifier, that their superior strategy relative to the rest of the region really propelled them to be able to get that second seed out of the China region.
Very interesting picks with them, but you know, there's always something to be said about just having comfort and familiarity with the class. Now, of course, when you're matched up against teams that are really pushing for specific strats, for output, for all these different considerations, funnels we've talked about over the MDI, that can lead a little bit extra, but it's been interesting seeing what they've been able to do with this. Dratnos, what were some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway from this is, look, Mage is really hard. Fire Mage is one of the hardest specs in the game right now, I would say. Like, just executing your rotation well against a training dummy. This might just be me. I might just suck at Fire Mage, but I have a lot of trouble doing that. It's a very hard spec to play well. So, if you're a Fire Mage main and you already have that muscle memory down, you're already good at that spec, I think it makes a lot of sense to play it in this sort of setting because it can perform as well as a lot of these other specs can. I think it just requires more training time. So if you're somebody who's a multi-classer, I think you'd look at it and you'd be like, well, I could pick up Fire Mage, or I could use that time to pick up two other specs. So I think if you have a Fire Mage main, it can actually, we're going to see it look really good, I think, in a lot of these maps. We saw some other teams, flexing into Mage and doing a lot less damage than FTBZM's Mage was. So I think I wouldn't look at it as like, oh, they have this off-meta thing that, they're trying to figure out how to make it work. I think it can be totally good. It can be an absolutely solid member of the team. I do think it's harder to do it on, but it has some nice benefits as well. You've got Cauterize, a cheat death on a DPS is it's one of the reasons Rogue is strong. It's one of the reasons Aug Evoker's been strong. That is a little bit of extra safety that you get on that mage compared to some of the other specs you could bring.
I will also, I do also want to reiterate, and something that you might see is something that's called snapping tech with their warlock, where they utilize summoning stone as well with the sigil of misery, kind of like what we saw in Dragonflight Season 3, where you drop that sigil of flame, where you drop that sigil of flame underneath the mobs right as you accept the summon, and it snaps the mobs all the way across the land. We saw it in like Dawnbreaker. I think we saw it in Siege of Borealis. I would say just be on the lookout for that kind of thing, because that's some really unique tech that you can utilize with the Warlock still.
Super cool to see what they're going to end up doing. And now we can take a look at the dungeons that they're going to be bringing these into. So City of Threads, Necrotic Wake have been banned out. Makes, do you think these made sense for them to take out of the mix?
I'm not so sure about the City of Threats. Maybe that's a personal choice. I do understand the +12 Necrotic Wake, though. That dungeon has some very tough bosses that a lot of stuff can go wrong with, so taking that out and saying, okay, we'll take the Stonebolt if it comes to it, and we'll face the Arakara 12 instead. I can understand that choice, yeah.
Yeah, I think between, Arakara 12, Necrotic Wake 12, I think I would also probably ban out the Necrotic Wake, but that's just me, so we'll have to see how they face it here. But we had our own predictions as well about what we thought might happen, so let's take a look. Oh, Dratnos, you're the one going 2-1 this time.
I'm a believer. What can I say? I think Mists is actually a really good map for FTBZM's composition. I think that the Warlock in there is naturally well-suited to Mist Eternal Scythe. You can do a lot of good stuff with Gateway. There's 2 great gateways. Actually, 3 great gateways available there, but you can only do 2 of them, because there's one after Mistcaller you can do, or there's one in the trash section down after Mistcaller, but you can only do one of those because of the Gateway CD. Either of those, though, I think is a pretty big time save. And Fire Mage I actually think works out really well in this dungeon as well. A lot of the bosses work out really nicely to dump a big combustion into. Nagura agrees with me as well, the 2-1 from her as well. I think this is going to be a 1-0 lead for FTBZM, and then I think Polish Mountain will clutch it out in the next 2 maps. That's my exact prediction for how this is going to go.
All right. Tettles, you went 2-0 alongside some of us. What were your thoughts on that? You think FT has a chance?
I feel like FTBZM was doing noticeably slower strats than what we saw from Polish Mountain. So while Polish Mountain has had, I think they've been the least consistent team over the course of in terms of what we're seeing from the MDI Globals. I do think they've been the least consistent team. I think in general their faster strats should be able to allow them to edge out FTBZM in a pretty considerable way until the point where FTBZM is maybe able to capitalize on a Polish Mountain mistake, and at that point you're really scared that you're going to lose this series 2-0.
These 2 underdogs have a lot to prove. Polish Mountain has climbed their way up to towering heights, and FTBZM is just entering the arena from the Chinese region. Both of them are going to be going head-to-head here in Game 1. Mists of Eternal Scythe, this is all you, Makes.
Thank you so much, and of course, how would it be any different? We are going to be seeing that Mage and the Warlock composition come back to play. Now, Dratnos, you've already, at length, established why you think both of these classes are good here, but I would argue that the classes we have been seeing in the Mists are also really good that have been chosen by Polish Mountain
yeah,
here, so
see, that's the thing, is when you're talking about the Mage and the Warlock being strong, it's like, you can say good things about them, and I have, but we have deaths already for both teams. Interrupting me there is a death on the Druid for Polish Mountain, and the Shaman for FTBZM, which that is, in fact, a change in their composition than what they were running. So they had a Death Knight main that was playing DK in all their dungeons in the China region, swapping to Elemental Shaman, not Enhancement for FTBZM. That's
well,
cool.
It is the blue class after all, so I think give them some credit. That's close enough. Here comes the first Warlock Gate, good tech, out of FTBZM. And in the meantime, we did have 2 more deaths on the side of Polish Mountain, racking them up to 3 deaths total already, with not even 2 minutes on the clock. I think this map might get really spicy between these 2 teams.
Yeah, I mean, okay, FTBZM, one thing that this comp lets them do, they can play a lot of really good trinkets on this comp. This dungeon, so you've got 3 casters now. All of them could be playing the Spymaster's Web, although You do also kind of want the the other one, the Mad Queen's mandates for the boss burns on the first and second boss. It's also really good for them. But they have Spymaster's Web on all 3 of their ranged DPS, and they have it on their healer as well. So they've got a bunch of Spymaster's Webs available. When they press those, they could do some incredible damage. They could do something like take Mistcaller from 40 to 0 without getting that 10% guessing game cast. If they have all those stacks of Spymasters being sent in it, that could be a really big time save for them. That's not something that you can usually... Like, we've seen teams do that in the 10s and the 9s in this dungeon. I wonder if they could maybe do it on the plus 11. Either way, even with the extra deaths, Polish Mountain are going to be getting into the boss well ahead of FTBZM. The 30 seconds of death time are probably about equal things here, but this is not good news for FTBZM, right? Things have gone pretty wrong for Polish Mountain, and they're still on par or maybe even slightly ahead at this point.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that analysis. They just took longer on doing the actual damage to the poles, which is never a great sign when we're seeing as big differences in comp choices as we are seeing right now. That gives me a little bit of a worry looking at the polls that are yet to come, but I am so eager to be wrong on this. So we're going to be seeing how they do. For now, both of the teams are going to be trying to push the boss into face. Has happened on the side of Polish Mountain already, and the big thing is one phasing this boss.
Wow.
Now on this 11, Polish Mountain are doing just that. Question is, can FTBZM do the same thing right now?
Look at the damage meter. The druid there did 110 million damage on that boss fight. Now, there's no way the priest is going to get anywhere close to that. A lot of that is the Heart of the Wild, the Convoke the Spirits, the Mad Queen's Mandate that Polish Mountain's healer is using. FTBZM are going to have power infusion from their priest onto somebody else, and you can see that was used to decent effect here. All of their casters really high on damage, but still going to have to do another tree phase. That's one of the strengths of Resto Druid in this dungeon, is just Convoke the Spirits, Heart of the Wild on the first boss, absolutely nukes it, dealing a full 50 million damage extra compared to the Disciplined Priest. So big strength there for Polish Mountain. This is a huge time save compared to what FTBZM are doing. I mean, FTBZM, they're going to have to kill the tree again, I think, here.
I'm not sure they agree with that just now. I am seeing all of the cast still go into Ingra, so I think maybe there's a world where they can just clutch it out.
Look at the Embrace Darkness cast, though.
Try to get it, but yeah, I guess not.
Yeah, see, this is the problem, is if you're not close, then you get this spot where the boss casts Embrace Darkness at 4%. Embrace Darkness is a huge damage reduction. Now they're all getting feared by that repulsive visage. The bewildering pollen is coming out from the tree. I mean, yeah, this is brutal. Now they've lost a DPS player as well to one of those kicks. Even though the boss is at 3%, it has a huge damage. I think it's an 80% damage reduction on it, so it's effectively at 15% health if they wanted to keep focusing it. And instead, they're going to just go and switch onto the tree, and this is the worst of all worlds for FTBZM. They're going to break this tree, and the boss is going to be at like 1% health. I mean, absolute mayhem on the side of FTBZM. This is such a brutal time loss. Look at the bottom of the screen right now. Polish Mountain, 3:11 boss 1 split. FTBZM nearly 2 minutes slower, despite having less deaths. I mean, they did have a death come in on that boss, but Polish Mountain had 3 deaths in the first section of the dungeon, so it's not like this was a perfect run from Polish Mountain, but it's still 2 minutes faster. This bodes so poorly for FTBZM, I'd say.
And this was the map that you were kind of saying they might have a chance to take off the Polish Mountain based on the team comps being played here. In the meantime, Polish Mountain is nearly through the maze already. They have arrived at Gorge Gullet and they are making way towards that second boss. Well, FTBZM just finished the first one, and once again, a death does come in. They're now even in death timers as well, and that is a very, very unfortunate start into the day for the CN team.
Okay, phew. One of the roots went off actually for FTBZM. Not something that you usually can allow to happen, but they managed to avoid any deaths during that. And yeah, I mean, this is going to be a huge win for Polish Mountain if they can keep it from any further mistakes happening. I mean, they are so far ahead at this point. The mini-boss already going down before FTBZM even opens the first gate in the maze here. And they actually get the wrong gate here on the first one, so they get stunned. Now they're having to look at these at the puzzle here, figure out the right path through this maze. Things are going from bad to worse for FTBZM. And the Ellie Shaman that they're playing here, I'm a big fan of Ellie Shaman. I will say the maze is often one of the most annoying spots for the Ellie Shaman because mobs just love not standing in your Earthquake here. They're going to be charging out of it with Expel. They're going to be putting down these Mist Wards, forcing your tank to move the pack outside of where you've placed all these Earthquakes. So this is one of the sections where I think enhancement is way better, is this maze section of the dungeon. The Elemental Shaman may be a little bit better at the start and the end of the dungeon if you can make it work, though.
I will say, similar to Polish Mountain, FTBZM is a new team to the MDI and to WoW Esports as such. So maybe just starting off that dungeon with a little bit of trouble already sent them down a path where, focus was lost and then just, bad came to worse. So maybe they'll just need to shake off the series and then come back from there. But for now, they're still pushing onwards and trying to finish this dungeon with maybe the hope of something going wrong for Polish Mountain. But they have arrived at Mistcaller already. This dungeon notably is rather fast. There's some extra trash that you have to play after Mistcaller, which I'm sure we're going to be seeing on both sides of these teams. But there is not much time left in the overall dungeon timer.
Yeah, Mistcaller could be an opportunity for FTBZM to catch up a little bit if they can use some of those Spy Masters. The problem is, it feels like an overcommitment to use Spy Masters and cooldowns to try and take Mistcaller from 10 to 0. If you go for that, you might still miss. It's still unreliable. It's still depending on the spell sequence, and all of that value of that Spy Masters would go into it. As FTBZM, no, they're back at the start of the maze again. They picked the wrong gate once more. So, I mean, this is so tragic for FTBZM. Meanwhile, Polish Mountain about to hit 40% on Mistcaller. They have a lot of cooldowns available here. They've got Ascendance. They've got Kingsbane, they've got Deathmark. They're not going to have Breath of Sindragosa, but they do have Heart of the Wild Convoke the Spirits. I wonder if this is something that can be done. I talk about this pretty much every time I'm watching a Mistcaller at MDI, because it's always a big question mark for me, is will this be possible? This is one of the highest key levels we've got for Mystotyrna Scythe across all 4 of our MDI weekends this season. So this is where it's going to be the hardest, but they do have a decent amount of resources. There's going to be the Kingsbane. Kingsbane ramps up in damage over its duration. This is going to be really nice. The last 8 seconds of the Kingsbane with that Shiv are going to overlap with this 10% burn. 4, 2, 0, dead! Polish Mountain have made it happen. They are going to eliminate Mistcaller, and look at this. They're going to run around the side. This is actually slightly faster, even without a Warlock Gateway. And look at what their Warrior did as well. When you play that Prot Warrior, you can actually leap through where that Gateway would have been, so your Warrior can be a little bit ahead of the rest of your team, which means that then you can get this next pull started a little bit more quickly, depending on how you want to do this. Shroud of Concealment is going to be used to skip them past this first Acid Gullet. Now, they only have 70% count, so they're not going to be able to skip everything at the end of this dungeon. Look what FTBZM are doing. They're fighting 2 Gorge Gullets at once, so they're going to get a little bit more count in the maze, and they will be able to do 1 fewer Staghorn pull with a really cool gateway if they get to that point. But Makes, I think there's some danger in FTBZM not even getting to this part of the dungeon before Polish Mountain stop the clock.
Yep, you're taking those words right out of my mouth. Polish Mountain have started their first massive pull towards the tail end of this dungeon. Now, there is more to come after this, but like I said, dungeon timer only stretches so far, and FTBZM still need to go through Mistcaller as well. While they are finishing out the Gorge Gullets, and like you're saying, they're gonna get count from them, that's not the only thing that they need to do. While another death does come in from their Warlock, unfortunately, is going to be rest here by their tank, brought back to life as they are making way towards Mistcaller. Polish Mountain have already arrived at Tradova, and they're taking all of the trash into it. They're not slowing down by any means necessary. Bloodlust is being used here as everything is being sent into the boss.
Yeah, this is huge for Polish Mountain. The lust, the burn, the 0 deaths after the first little bit of the dungeon, which we don't count. Those don't count. Those ones are not to worry. Polish Mountain have had a clean run aside from that, and they are on this last boss. They have all the trash that they need under the boss, I believe. We actually have, let's see, we have 1 Gorger, 1 Acid Gullet, so I think we're going to need to get a little bit more count once these 2 die. I think we're going to need to go into that pack off over to the side. if I'm not mistaken here, for Polish Mountain. So that is going to be something that will slow them down a little bit at the end of this run, but not a huge deal at all. This is still such a great run out of them. They did so much boss damage with that Lust, with all their cooldowns. They've got an Affix spawn as well that's going to help them get through this last shield on the boss. Shield already broken. And yeah, I mean, they're just charging to the finish line here. FTBZM still working their way through the maze. Now, it's not as bad as it looks for FTBZM because they are getting a lot of count out of this, right? They already have more count than Polish Mountain had when they were exiting the maze. So FTBZM will have one less pull at the end of the dungeon, but yeah, they're just getting absolutely smoked at this point.
I was going to say, Dratnos, I really appreciate your positive outlook on things,
no,
but Tredova is on 19% for Polish Mountain, and they do have the last trash that they did need in this dungeon now together, as they are finishing out the boss. 10% more to go for Polish Mountain, and they are on better standing when it comes to the death timer as well, 3 versus 4, so we don't even need to wait any additional seconds. As soon as this boss and the additional trash is done, FTBZM will be freed from the maze and its horrors.
Yeah, they just have to stop the clock here with that last Staghorn, and Polish Mountain are gonna do it. They are gonna put FTBZM out of their misery in this map. FTBZM, a lot went wrong for that in that run, but it's a best of 3, of course. It doesn't matter how much you lose the first map by. In fact, if anything, you'd rather have all your mistakes happen in map 1 so that you can then have no mistakes in the rest of the series. So that could be their strat here.
Dratnos, I love it. I love the optimism. And you know what? This is something that we've talked about, right? You know, victory here to Polish Mountain, but experience makes a big difference. And as both of these teams come in for their first MDI, you can see right off the bat how easy it is to just make a mistake and have that avalanche on you. But Polish Mountain didn't let that slip at the start, send them tumbling down, and instead just kept continuing on, having a very clean run, which I think we should probably focus on. You know, FTBZM, they got to pull themselves up and figure things out. But Polish Mountain, Dratnos, what do you think went really smoothly for them in this Mists?
I mean, it was one of the best boss 1 and boss 2 executions that we've seen. They killed that first boss before it even broke out of its damage amp. Oftentimes we'll see teams get it to like 9-8% and then have to deal with that remaining little bit of boss health without that damage amp, which is a lot less efficient than what Polish Mountain were able to do. They just destroyed that boss. You can see that spike at around 3 minutes of DPS there for them. A lot of that's coming from the Resto Druid. The combination of Mad Queen's Mandate, Heart of the Wild, Convoke the Spirits, those 3 buttons on Resto Druid do so much damage to that boss. And then they did it again. They took down Mistcaller from 10 to 0. They did it with like 2 seconds to spare on the guessing game cast as well. So even though this key is plus 11, it's fairly high. It's higher than the plus 9s, the plus 10s we've had in some of our previous weekends for Mists. They were able to make both of those damage checks, each of which saves them a huge amount of time, especially compared to FTBZM on that first boss. Having to kill the tree a second time was such a huge time loss, and that was the beginning of the end for FTBZM before the maze, which was, of course, even more going wrong.
Yeah, and we'll revisit it here. Tettles, would you like to share some of your observations as well?
This was a dominant performance by Polish Mountain. I mean, right off the bat, they looked a bit sketched out here. They had 2 deaths to the Shaman on this first pull. They had some Spike Claws bleeding the entire group. That's always really difficult to recover for Yete. But they have the Lusts rolling, so it's like kind of okay until Yete ends up going down to the 3rd stack, that bloodletting from that Spike Claw. That makes their Shaman go down twice. However, this is like an easy recover, especially whenever, like Dratnos was saying here, this burn is phenomenal. I think that it's really off the back of this Resto Druid DPS. A lot of the times, you don't have the power of that Resto Druid bursting for like 1.5 million DPS, and they absolutely crush this boss. And then on the other side, whenever you check out FTBZM, they get the boss too. Checks notes 35%, and then they commit to the boss. But the boss goes into its 80% DR at 4% HP, and this is perhaps the beginning of the end for FTBZM. FTBZM then had a few more mistakes in the maze where they walked into the wrong door, and they broke rule number 1. Do you guys know what rule number 1 is?
No.
No double frog. No double frog. That is against the law. No double frog is allowed. Like, in any situation, you're not allowed to pull a second frog on top of the other Gorge Gullet. And so they broke rule number 1. And fortunately enough, Polish Mountain, again, just looked really dominant. They didn't play a perfect run, and so it was kind of similar to what we saw from them in Group A, where their strats are incredibly fast, but they need to be a little bit more consistent. They had a couple of they also had a couple more mistakes on the side of Polish Mountain, where their Resto Druid ended up pulling like a pack, and he accidentally melded it off. There was, again, the deaths at the very beginning, but I think that you have to call this a dominant performance. And yeah, this is kind of what we're talking about, where Yete is worried about threat, and he just presses meld, and that pack ends up running away. That's why they had to do that pack after the boss. Not the end of the world, but I think that once you start playing against the Perplexed, the Mandatories, the Holy Molys, teams are going to be able to kind of exploit like a very minor mistake like that and turn that into like a pretty big-ish blunder.
Okay, I do want to go back to the start of the day. Remember when Zyro was talking about all the different specs that might do better as we move into plus 12s? One thing he talked about was a caster comp. And FTBZM here, we talked about them playing their one comp everywhere. They actually did make a change for this map, right? They changed their Death Knight into an Elemental Shaman, an extra caster, bringing them up to 3 casters, 4 Spymaster's Web users in their comp. The silver lining here, I think, for FTBZM is that might work out really well in those higher keys when we do get to those plus 12s, which I believe we might have one of those in our series. I'm not sure if it's the next map that's going to come up here or if it would be game 3, but that could be something that works out really nicely in this global finals environment with that. Again, the plus 12 keys are basically 2 key levels higher than plus 11, thanks to that Xalatat's Guile affix, and we do have one of those here in that Arakara City of Echoes. So that might be the hidden edge for FTBZM. Maybe if they've got that swap for this map too, although Arakara is a really good Death Knight map as well, is the thing.
Can you do that strategy with the Rogue and the Resto Druid where you run off to the right-hand side and like solo one of the mini-bosses on a 12?
I feel like on a plus 12, it's like the damage is higher, so your defensives are you probably need to overlap them a little bit more, and you have so much more damage that you need to deal that I think you're going to not be able to kill those before they kill you.
Yeah, I think it's going to be highly unlikely to see the split in the plus 12. I'd be really surprised if it does happen. I just quickly want to say that Polish Mountain are also playing really well. Yeah, they had those 3 deaths in the first poll, and that was a little bit of a mishap, but after that they played really clean, and like Dratnos was saying, they also did really well with the bosses. I think the FTBZM might not be the only team that's not able to do a one face on this plus 11 in this tournament. I'm actually curious to see if other teams can do the same thing, and I'm really curious on if their Arakara looks just as clean, or if there's maybe still a chance for an upset.
Hopefully there's still that opportunity. Right now this is a plus 12, which we saw enter this weekend here for the global finals, so that adds that bit of extra difficulty. But you know, part of the competition I really think is just shaking it off when things go horribly wrong. We've seen, you know, 10 plus death, just wipe fest. We've seen all kinds of things where something just went really wrong and you could not get your footing again. So FTBZM, they have to shake it off. They were already trying to adapt, so hopefully they can adapt to this hurdle as well. And you know, Polish Mountain, it's good to see them play really well, like you were saying, Makes, because that's a big thing for them, right? That consistency and just proving that they can maintain that. So either way, in this Arakara, seeing how they're pitted against this plus 12 is sure to be exciting, amping up some of the difficulty. Polish Mountain has the advantage here. If they win this one, they will be continuing on, and FTBZM will be moving down, but FTBZM has the chance here and now to shake it off, get back into this, and see if they can really pull themselves up and through this next dungeon. This will be game 2, Arakara, Polish Mountain versus FTBZM. And Dratnos, give us your info as we head into the dungeon here.
Yeah, I'm going to be very curious to see what comp these teams have rolled up to this dungeon with, because there are a lot of different options for Arakara. That plus 12 keystone level is the big thing I'm looking at as well, because it does add some extra difficulty, but it also means there's more consistency. One of the things that happens in Arakara sometimes is that affix spawn timings could really matter, and there aren't any of those variables in the plus 12. There's no random timer on when the affix spawns. Looks like FTBZM are going to go back. They're going to swap their Elemental Shaman back over to a Death Knight. They're going to swap their Disc Priest back onto that Comfort Resto Shaman as well. So FTBZM playing the comp that they were known for, the comp that they used to secure a global final spot out of the Chinese region. Both teams heading into this poll, and this is the Lust as well. Lust for Polish Mountain actually not being pressed by FTBZM, but they're going to lose their mage.
Yeah, so at the very beginning, the mage was already in fight and was dropping really, really low, and only with the help of that Resto Shaman was able to live for a while, but then that death did come in. However, Dratnos, if you're seeing what I'm seeing, it might be that both of them have actually opted to go to a different side.
So what I'm looking at is look at the details for FTBZM. They played Fire Mage in every single dungeon in the Chinese bracket, but their mage is now spec'd Frost for this map, for this Arakara 12. Now, unfortunately, their mage has died twice, so the Frost mage is doing less than the healer damage on this particular pull, but that's just because of the deaths. It's actually a spec that I think will work out really well in a lot of these pulls. A lot of these pulls, you have a lot of trash, right? Like, look at this pull that's going on for Polish Mountain. This situation here, you can have a Blizzard down hitting like 20 mobs, and then you can just be dumping Glacial Spikes into a primary target like this mini-boss here. So I think this is actually a really cool... again, flex for FTBZM. FTBZM literally played the exact same 5 specs for all 8 maps of the Chinese bracket, I believe. And they've now swapped in the Mists, they swapped for an Elemental Shaman. And in this Arakara, they've swapped into a Frost Mage from the Fire Mage. Very cool to see. And again, it's just a shame that they have had 2 deaths already to start off this dungeon, whereas Polish Mountain looking clean, already have that mini-boss dead. The mini-boss is stunned, both teams using that tailoring stun on these mini-bosses, which is a very powerful effect. Not normally a stunnable mob, but you can do it with that tailoring effect on the ground.
Yeah, so that's something that allowed teams in the past to actually split up in groups and just do one of these mini-mobs with trash on their own, while the other part of the team was doing the other side. But trouble for FTBZM strikes once again. Can they still finish out the mini-boss, please? That would be a very, very good moment. DK goes back in there, says, yes, we absolutely can. Finishes out that mob there, as they did have a bit of struggle with setting that entire pull up. But like you're mentioning, that tailoring stun, very, very strong in this dungeon here. If you have access to it, you should definitely be using it, particularly on those massive pulls here. But there's also a pull towards the tail end of the dungeon that we've been seeing it used on by some teams. So I'm curious on what the plan is going to be there, as Polish Mountain is routing back to the boss area. And we're going to be getting a first glimpse at plus 12 Arakara, our first boss, and how that one is going to pace out, as they have pulled Avanox.
Yeah, the good news for FTBZM is that they have saved their Lust. They will be able to use this Lust on Avanox, whereas Polish Mountain are doing this huge pull without the benefit of Bloodlust. 4 stacks of a bleed on their tank here. This is a very dangerous section of the dungeon, although I believe Cheat Death is still available. Beautiful Sigil of Chains gripping all of these mobs up. And they're going to try and kill off... They have to kill off the 4 mobs that are spawned by the boss before it finishes the Gossamer Onslaught cast, or else it will eat them. So that is a very important DPS check for Polish Mountain to meet here as they move as a group, baiting those swirlies. It looks like the only trash that's left alive now is the trash, not the boss spawned ones, which is really good. And they are now having the trash starting to explode from those toxic ruptures. Beautiful work by Polish Mountain. A couple of poisons on the group here, but nothing that they can't heal through. Oh, their tank is so low, but it looks like somehow going to survive there. It is Last Resort popped, though, so that is one big resource that Polish Mountain now don't have. FTBZM don't have that either, though.
Well, we still have a paints up, at least on the side of Polish Mountain, so that can be used to help tankiers survive here on the side of Polish Mountain. But FTBZM also have reached Avanox, are now in fight with that very first boss. But by the side of Polish Mountain, Cheat Death coming out here from Watch, you can see how long these plus 12 bosses really can be. And it does feel a tiny bit counterintuitive to how the MDI usually is, where you pull so much onto a boss and then you just nuke everything down, like we've been seeing in the Stone Vaults, for example. Here, you definitely have to spend some extra time on this boss, and I feel like this would be where single target classes could shine a little bit more, but we're going to be seeing whether or not FTBZM have access to that on their side, as Polish Mountain finishing out that first boss and are now en route to the second one through, I would say, I don't know if this is the dangerous or the most dangerous part or the part before that last boss, but it's definitely a harsh part of the dungeon. We're going to be seeing how big they can go here.
Yeah, this is a big pull for Polish Mountain already. We have one Blood Guard in on this pull. We have a Stag Shell, 2 Stag Shells that need to be managed. Death Grip, a very powerful resource for this section. Ooh, nice. It looks like they Dominate-minded one of the Stag Shells as well and brought it in that way. So all of them are grouped up. They need to be using stuns and knocks and everything on all of these Alarm Shrill casts. None of those can be allowed to go off. Otherwise, they will lose count and spawn an extra Blood Guard. So a very important job here for Polish Mountain. The Blood Guard is now dead. Nicely done. Next one comes in.
Reach the boss for FTBZM? Are we just...
I don't think so. The boss gets all big and red if it does.
Okay, they're so close.
Yeah, so they won't actually get eaten by the boss until after the Gossamer Onslaught cast. So you can have them under boss for a little while, but then after this Onslaught cast, it will now eat any of the ads from the previous spawn if they get too close. So they're kiting away from that most recent spawn. Now those are eligible to be eaten.
I thought that was still the previous pack.
Oh, maybe it was, yeah.
We did manage to finish them out, like you're saying, and they are managing to hopefully finish out this boss as well. But Polish Mountain already underway towards that second pull in this area here. One more time, they do have to deal with the Stag Shells, but we're just going to be trying to pull everything together here with the pack that's waiting on the other side, and that should give us a nice little pull before that next boss, as FTBZM finishing out Avanox and now also routing towards that next part of the dungeon. We're going to be seeing a little skip here from Polish Mountain, huh?
Yeah, this is a big pull on, or a big opportunity for Polish Mountain to gain time here. That is a nice skip that they can do. Anybody can do that if you have a tank that can leap over the wall. FTBZM actually have a Warlock Gateway that they can use to just get the whole team across that wall if they want to. But they're going to be fighting this Blood Guard. Oh, their tank's dropping solo. FTBZM in a lot of danger here. Last Resort not available. The Stag Shell off to the side as well. Gets gripped in. Beautifully done by FTBZM. So they have all these mobs grouped up. There's actually a big stun coming out for them as well. But this Blood Guard does need to die for FTBZM. They need to be focusing damage into it. While the Blood Guard is alive, all of the other mobs nearby are getting a big 50% damage reduction. Now that Blood Guard is about to die, they will be able to finish off all the rest of the trash there. So slightly less ambitious pull than what Polish Mountain did, I think. But still, a very big pull and a lot of count for FTBZM. Their problem is just they're so behind in positioning in this dungeon, in Death Timer, and in Lust timing. They held that first Lust for so long because all the mistakes came before they would have pressed the Lust. They're in danger of the dungeon being over for Polish Mountain before their Lust comes back up. And that's not at all good news for FTBZM. At this point, they probably need something to go quite wrong for Polish Mountain if they want a chance to get back into this game.
And keep in mind, they're already 1 point behind in this best of 3, so if Polish Mountain can take this map, it means lower bracket for FTBZM for sure tomorrow, as they are trying to avoid that fate, maybe stay in the upper bracket one more round, and maybe see that third map of this best of 3. But Polish Mountain are finishing out on a noob right now, 20% to go, and then that very last, very lethal part of the dungeon awaits. I would say trash count looks pretty good here for Polish Mountain. FTBZM are working on getting to the same amount right now. One more time, they do need to deal with this Blood Guard here before they can path towards the next boss. And I'm curious actually if we are going to be seeing the skip or if they decide to pull the additional trash. Blood Guard does go down on the right side, and on the left side that second boss will also fall.
Yeah, Polish Mountain so far ahead there. 9 minutes and 20 seconds the split on that boss going down. So they hop on their mounts. Let's see what they decide to do with this Overseer up here. They can get access to a tailoring stun. Sometimes we see people use it to make this skip a little bit easier. It looks like they're not going to skip this Overseer, though. They're just going to take it forwards into a pull in this area. And they're going to do this section of the dungeon in probably 2 pulls. They're going further here. This is a dangerous pull for Polish Mountain. No Last Resort available for their tank either. So a lot of possibility of not just your tank, but the rest of your group dying. These winged carriers love to just charge people. Yeah, they're going into the Hauler. So this Hauler is going to get a tailoring stun at some point. That's going to be probably on its second slam.
for sure, once everything is stacked together, this is where that stun is gonna come in. You need to make your life just a little bit easier here if you are Polish Mountain, so everything is getting stacked up, and then that's where that's gonna be coming in, I'm pretty sure. Second slam just happened, lots of damage going out to the group. Here it is, stun has been used on the side of Polish Mountain, and they are making a way on the boss, mini boss HP on the Hauler, and then after that they can go into boss. They do have that Bloodlust available. It's going to be a little bit longer until cooldowns are back up and available for them to make the best use out of that Bloodlust, but looking at how far they are in comparison to FTBZM, I think they don't need to worry about those extra seconds right now. They can maybe even take it a little bit slower, knowing how much trouble has happened for FTBZM at the beginning of the dungeon. Sometimes at this point teams do know, so I wouldn't be surprised to see that, but we have pulled the final boss for Polish Mountain, and as soon as coolies are up, I would expect to see that Bloodlust fly in as well.
Yeah, 50 seconds until those 2-minute CDs are available, so they'll probably just hold until then, and then all of their classes will have all of their CDs lined up together. That Bloodlust is going to send the boss from 50 to 0 very quickly once they do get those cooldowns back up. But they have killed off the Overseers. They're at 100% count. Now, this boss is still dangerous, even without any trash on top of it. We've seen a lot of deaths to this Cosmic Singularity. There's depending on what you're trying to do against it, sometimes you have a very tight timing window to press a movement button, or sometimes you just kind of get caught by surprise. Two people rush for the same blood puddle, and it's a very easy way to wipe on this fight. Plus, when you're playing this full melee comp, these poisons can be a huge problem in melee as well. So Polish Mountain are not done just yet. They do have some flexibility, though. They could probably wipe and still be decently favored, given how far behind FTBZM are. The Polish Mountain, 3 seconds off of that Ascendance cooldown. They are about to hit this Lust, and they are going to absolutely demolish this boss. Maybe going to wait until after the next Cosmic Singularity so that they can just have full uptime on it. Here comes that Singularity. All their players finding a way to be safe here. Of course, the Death Knight just able to press Death's Advance. Life Grip going to come out on the Shaman as well there. And here is the Lust. The boss at 62%. All the CDs coming out, and that boss's health is just starting to drop so quickly.
Yeah, it is 50% to go on a Polish Mountain, and they are zooming through it, trying to clock in that 2-0. And if that happens, it's been all 2-0s for today. I'm actually curious on where that's going to place us tomorrow, as there are more games waiting then. But FTBZM trying to maybe reach one more step in this dungeon progression before Polish Mountain clock out that timer. 18%. One more time, that Cosmic Singularity is going to come. Bloodlust has run out, so anything that is now happening is natty damage, as some of the gamers would say, and will need to come through. But 10% to go for Polish Mountain, and I am willing to lock it in and say no way they wipe from here. This is going to be a win for Polish Mountain with 3% to go and a 2-0 in the second map.
It would have been really incredible if you had somehow managed to curse them.
That would have been crazy.
I've seen it on that boss as well. Like, the poisons go off and it hits somebody, and then their poison goes off and it just destroys all the melee.
Thankfully, that did not happen. Thankfully, they rose above that last-minute curse curveball, and Polish Mountain has claimed victory here, 2-0, bringing us, yes, to a full 2-0 day. Incredible seeing all of these teams blast, but Polish Mountain in particular doing so well here with these runs. I mean, incredible seeing their performance. And as we kind of look at it, Dratnos, I mean, is this what they need to continue pushing forward to be real contenders in the upper brackets?
Absolutely. I mean, this run out of Polish Mountain looked sublime, right? A 0-death run in a +12 Arikara. That is a very impressive feat for Polish Mountain. If they can pull that off consistently, I mean, yeah, they'll absolutely be challenging, not just for that, like, I would say the 4th place slot is the one that a lot of people have as one of the most open slots, because Mandatory, Perplexed, and Holy Moly have all looked so good over the course of their cup weekends. But I think if Polish Mountain play like this, they could absolutely challenge those teams as well. I mean, this was a really, really good run. They played that strategy to perfection, I would say.
For sure. Tuttles, give us your perspective on this one as the analyst.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that Polish Mountain, almost exactly like Dratno said, 1340 run. I think the fastest RCR that we had seen prior to this weekend was a 1030 by mandatory. Now that was on a key level 11. So I actually think that the 1340 on the key level 12 with that guile is actually a pretty respectable time. I think that they looked really solid in this dungeon, all things considered. And I actually noticed a couple of points of this dungeon where they could probably save 20 to 30 seconds with a little bit more aggressive chaining. So I think that they were maybe a little bit more conservative with their chaining, just seeing a couple spots how far ahead they were. But I think that Dratnos was spot on. I think that how they were pulling this first area and how they were getting set up in this dungeon, it really opens them up, in my opinion, for that fourth place slot potential. Now, it's going to kind of come down to their consistency. I think this is a team that we talked about it a lot in Group A. Are they going to be able to have deathless runs with their fast strats, or are their fast strats going to come back to bite them, like we saw in the Mist of Tyr Scythe, which was pretty rough. But I think that strats like this, where your tank is jumping over the wall and he's porting your entire group, you're making sure to get all of these web mages and all of this trash into the boss, and just how this looked for Polish Mountain, it seems like a situation in which, if they are able to stick to their game plan at every single point, they should be fine. And I think that this end sequence that they have right here is something that a lot of other teams are probably going to be looking at and kind of playing something similar, how they did this haul or how they did this chain. But this chain right here is the part where I think that they can save about 30 seconds with just slightly more aggressive chaining. They were a bit slow on getting these wing carriers and mobs pulled into the haulers. They were a bit slow on getting the overseers pulled, and then they were a bit slow pulling that all into the boss. And I think that there's a decent amount of time that can be gained additionally there. But I think that overall, this was just like the Polish Mountain show. For FTBZM, they're going to have to, they lost so much time in the first poll, I'm just going to be straight up with you. And I don't think that that's something that can happen if they want to be competitive in this day's global finals. They have tomorrow, fortunately enough. They do have a lower bracket run that they can go on, but they have to be better than what we saw from them today.
They've got to definitely step it up and, I think, adjust and figure out how they can just lock in for tomorrow for sure, because as it was, we saw them really struggle to get back into it, but they were making some changes. They were trying to sort of combat what was going to be brought to them here, and I think all of that, speaks really highly of them. But, they got to pull it off for tomorrow as well. And as we can see here, FTBZM will be joining down in that lower bracket, while Polish Mountain will be facing off with Mandatory tomorrow. But looking at how everything has shaken out here on day one of our global finals, how has this all kind of come together for you on day one?
Honestly, I predicted all 2-0s, but I didn't think it would happen. I didn't have that much faith in my own prediction powers. I thought there was going to be at least one of these where it was going to be 2-1. So I am very curious for the games tomorrow as all of these teams go up against each other, and then what that means for specifically the development of the lower bracket, but also the upper bracket. I think we have a bunch of really, really interesting teams here in the MDI, and I always love seeing new talent and what it brings to the scene. I'm really curious.
Absolutely. I love seeing new folks try to get in here, new teams get to be showcased, and it's a learning experience. I mean, we've seen ducks can fly, right? Learn something from every single event they've participated in and just keep increasing. We've seen the same with many other teams. So it's great to have that chance and see some newcomers. I mean, Tettles, has anything really surprised you from today, or are there any matches tomorrow you're really looking forward to?
I think that Perplexed Holy Moly matchup, it has a possibility of going either way. I think that for Holy Moly, this is a team that I'm looking at as a potential top 3 contender, even though they were a little bit slower than Perplexed in time trials, even though they are one of the second seed out of the Group B weekends. I think that they have absolute upset potential, kind of like whenever we saw them in the upper finals of Group B and the finals of Group B versus Mandatory. We kind of talked about them having upset potential there. I think that is the marquee matchup that we're looking to see tomorrow.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be, I think, a really big one, and some exciting matches ahead for sure as the teams just continue narrowing down into these high caliber matchups and clawing their way through the elimination bracket, right, to try and secure a place up towards the top again. But I mean, Tettles, we heard Tettles is Dratnos. What are some of your favorite matchups for tomorrow, do you think?
I'm always a fan of the Saturday lower bracket gauntlet that we get. So for me, Ducks Can Fly versus Worms is going to be a huge one because both of these teams have shown a range of skill that I think definitely overlaps with each other. So if either one of those teams show up tomorrow, I think they absolutely could win there and potentially even set up a lower bracket run, but it has to start there in that lower round one. And these teams only get one more opportunity. So as a wise man is about to say, they've got to lock in or they're in danger of getting locked out.
Ooh, love it. Was the wise man you, Dratnos? Is that just what you say?
Many have, yes.
Many have said this. Yes,
Yeah,
sure.
that's right.
I hear this
people
all the
are saying
time.
this. Yes, good point.
No, I mean,
Many
it's so
such
true.
wise men.
Many such wise men. Many
could have
such
been anybody.
Dratnoses. Well, the elimination bracket is definitely where things are going to heat up tomorrow, and looking forward. Teams, made it this far, but of course they want to see if they can go all the way. Now, we had our predictions of who was going to go all the way today, and chat, you got yours in as well. So let's take a look at this reset predictions board and where day one has taken us.
Wow.
Yeah,
Look at
I
that.
bet.
Would you look at that?
Wow, Tettle's down here at the bottom with me. How's it feel?
Shut up.
Okay,
Nobody asked you.
Hey, Tettles, where you at, bro? Okay, production.
Makes, how's it feel being up at the top? I mean, chat is
Well,
above
I
you
will
probably.
say, for Group B, because I wasn't here, I had this agreement with our production that they would just match me to a caster, and I picked Zyro because I was like, Zyro surely has got the predictions down. I was on a really good score before, and then after Group B, suddenly my score was ruined, so I'm gonna need to have a talk with Zyro about that, but at least we're agreeing on this one, and we're back at the top, so...
Yeah, feeling good. And I mean, Dratnos, you're right there behind the top. Makes and Zyronic. I mean, you gonna try and get it tomorrow, you think?
Yeah, tomorrow I'm going to try really hard to predict the correct outcomes. Today I was kind of, it was a half-hearted effort, but tomorrow I'm really, really going for it.
Great, yeah, you better lock in or you'll get locked out.
That is, many say that, yeah.
Yeah, many say that. Many say that all the time. Well, that is going to do it for us here on day one of the Mythic Dungeon International Global Finals. The weekend is literally just starting, everybody. So make sure you tune in for the rest of it. We've got some huge competition ahead. We've got massive prizes at the end of it. And we have some fierce competition tomorrow as we face eliminations for many of our teams. So be sure to be back here, same time, same place for day two. That's at 10 a.m. PT, 7 p.m. CET. And we hope to see you there.